Hello everybody and welcome to a comprehensive history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. This retrospective journey will chronicle the legacy of the trading card game and explore how it has changed over time. This video will be covering the debut year of the card game, beginning with Patient Zero, The Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon. Released on March 8, 2002, Legend of Blue Eyes would be the first official set release for the TCG. It contained 126 cards, and sealed boxes will now set you back in the thousands. Many early fan favourites from the anime would appear in this set, including Red Eyes Black Dragon, Dark Magician, Exodia the Forbidden One, Blue Eyes White Dragon, and the Flame Swordsman. But those are not all this set had to offer. It also came with numerous powerful support cards, including the field-viping Dark Hole and Raigeki, the defensively minded Swords of Revealing Light and Manita-Bug, the creature-retrieving Monster Reborn, and the ever-so-powerful Pot of Greed. Legend of Blue Eyes was a good start, and its cards have since become iconic. However, it would be generous to say the game was playable at this point. While it was possible for players to gather cards and put together a 40-card deck, there wasn't really much strategy to the game at this point. More cards would be required for this game to satisfy a need for true strategic depth. 3 weeks after the release of Legend of Blue Eyes, we would get our first starter decks, Starter Deck Yugi and Starter Deck Kaiba. These decks would establish the rules of the game and bring structure to the many new players who are taking their first foray into the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! An interesting piece of trivia about these decks is that certain cards were changed outside of North America. Despite these changes, however, the core of the deck stayed the same. Cards such as Lashin, Change of Heart, Summon Skull, and Card Destruction would find their way into almost every deck. With the card pool expanded, players could now begin to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Properly, but there were still some restrictions that needed to be put into place. Unfortunately, some cards were just far too powerful, and something had to be done about them. Thus came the creation of the Limited List. This list would feature some of the most powerful cards in the game, and restrict how many copies of those cards players could use in their decks. Raigeki, Change of Heart, Pot of Greed, Monster Reborn, all 5 pieces of Exodia, and Dark Hole would be limited to 1 copy per deck. Swords of Revealing Light and Card Destruction would be semi-limited to 2 copies per deck. Here is an example of what an early Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck might have looked like in May 2002. As you can see, Summon Skull and Lashin were powerhouses of this early metagame. Many decks would be built around summoning these monsters and attacking over your opponent's defenses to take out their life points. It was a very basic strategy, but an effective one at that. It is crazy to think now, but cards such as Trap Hole and Stop Defense were really powerful in this meta. Straightforward beatdown decks such as these would come to define the game for most of 2002. And while this metagame was in danger of becoming stale quite quickly, it would not be around for long. Released in North America on June 26, 2002, Metal Raiders would be the largest fresh expansion this game had ever seen, as it introduced 144 new cards. Metal Raiders greatly expanded the game's depth and introduced many cards that would see play for years to come. Debuting in Metal Raiders would be Counter Traps, cards designed to be activated in response to other card effects. Counter Traps were faster than regular trap cards, making them what we now know as spell speed free. The only thing that can respond to a counter trap is another counter trap. Cards such as 7 Tools of the Bandit would bring an end to the dominance of Trap Hole. Meanwhile, despite being able to negate anything, Solemn Warning saw very little play on release. This is because players considered the cost of half their life points to be far too high. Like Legend of Blue Eyes before it, Metal Raiders came with numerous support cards that players could use to strengthen their decks. Mirror Force was a game changer that stopped your opponent's attacks and destroyed all their monsters. Tribute to the Doomed could destroy any one monster on the field. Heavy Storm would destroy all magic and trap cards on the field. Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest combined could search almost any monster from your deck when sent to the graveyard. Finally, Magician of Faith could retrieve any magic card from your graveyard and add it back to your hand. Here is how the limited list changed following the release of Metal Raiders. Mirror Force went to 1, while Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, and Heavy Storm would go to 2. Here is an updated version of the earlier beatdown deck list. Witch of the Black Forest, Sangan, Heavy Storm, and Mirror Force have all gone into the deck. Thanks to the enlarged card pool, there is now no one correct way to play a deck. Dark Elf, while powerful, could easily be replaced with 7 coloured fish, which was also released in Metal Raiders. Tribute to the Doomed allowed players to destroy their opponent's monsters without flipping them face up, making it the perfect out to Magician of Faith. Counter trap cards such as 7 Tools of the Bandit and Magic Jammer, while useful, were not necessary. Deck building at this time was still fairly linear, but there was some variation in how you chose to play. Yu-Gi-Oh! Quickly found popularity among children and collectors, but they were not the only people Konami wanted to cater to. There was a real desire for the TCG to grow as a competitive game, and so came the creation of Tournament Pack, a series of boosters that were handed out to players who competed at officially sanctioned events. Metal Raiders did much to display the game's potential, and it was time for the TCG to take the next step. Releasing on September 16th, 2002, Magic Ruler would be the most powerful set to date. The impact of Magic Ruler can still be felt today, as many of its cards would go down in infamy for their strength. Magic Ruler would also introduce 2 new monster subtypes to the game, Rituals and Toons. Ritual monsters were creatures who could only be summoned through the effects of certain spell cards. Toons were special effect monsters who were designed to be played in combination with the magic card Toon World. To give you an idea of just how powerful Magic Ruler was, here are an assortment of cards that are banned from modern play. Giant Trunade was banned in 2011 for enabling card loops. Snatch Steal has been banned and unbanned numerous times thanks to its ability to steal games off the opponent. Delinquent Duo was banned because paying 1000 life points to discard 2 cards from your opponent's hand was just too unfair. The Forceful Sentry would be banned for similar reasons, as it allowed you to look at your opponent's hand and shuffle 1 card back into their deck. Painful Choice would be banned because pitching 5 cards from your deck is one of the most powerful plays in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cyberjar would eventually be banned because of strategies that allowed you to deck your opponent out. And finally, Confiscation would be banned for many of the same reasons as the Forceful Sentry and Delinquent Duo. Overpowered cards aside, Magic Ruler still had plenty to offer in its card pool. Axe of Despair could equip to any monster and increase their attack by 1000 points, making it by far the strongest equip card. Mystical Space Typhoon could destroy any one magical trap card on the field, and could even be activated on your opponent's turn because it was a quick play card. Maha Phyla would have the ability where it would gain 500 attack points for each card equipped to it, making it the perfect combo piece to go with Axe of Despair. Mystic Tomato would be among the first recruiters, monsters who could summon other monsters from deck when they were destroyed. Upstart Goblin allowed you to draw 1 card from your deck at the cost of giving your opponent 1000 life points. The negligible cost of this card would lead to the creation of what would be known as the 37 card deck, as some players opted to run 3 of them. Giant Germ was another recruiter monster who could summon more copies of itself from the deck when destroyed. Additionally, it would inflict 500 points of damage to your opponent on destruction. Time to update the limited list, and I have to say, Magic Ruler wasn't messing around. 7 cards straight to limited. Painful Choice, Cyberjar, Snatch Steal, Upstart Goblin, the Forceful Sentry, Confiscation, and Delinquent Duo. The updated version of the beatdown deck is pretty self-explanatory. Every overpowered card from Magic Ruler has gone straight into the deck. On top of that, Mechanical Chaser has replaced Lashin, though realistically, most players did not have Mechanical Chaser. It was a very rare card. This list is very focused on aggression, but much like with Metal Raiders, there are different ways you can go about building your deck. Additional copies of Mystic Tomato would not have been a bad idea. Same goes for Giant Germ. Both cards would serve the purpose of thinning out your deck and setting up a Summon Skull tribute. It must also be noted that relinquished decks were very popular at this time, thanks to it being the most powerful ritual monster due to its effect, and also being the one with the lowest cost. As a level 1 monster, you could summon it by tributing anything. Also included from Magic Ruler is Sonic Bird and Senju of the Thousand Hands, who search ritual magic and monster cards respectively. It is time to move on, but first we must talk about the release of Morphing Jar in Tournament Pack 2. Much like Cyber Jar, this card was a powerful tool for engineering comeback plays. Today, the Tournament Pack 2 printing of Morphing Jar is among one of the rarest cards in the game. And with that, we have reached the last pack release of 2002, and boy did it go out with a bang! Releasing on October 20th, Pharaoh's Servant would be one of the more intriguing releases that year. It was the first pack to feature cards from the Battle City arc in the anime, such as Gearfried the Iron Knight, Buster Blader, Jinzo, and Parasite Parasite. Pharaoh's Servant would have less of a focus on power creep cards, and instead would encourage players to try creative deck building. At 105 cards, it would be the smallest set of 2002, but it would also be the most varied. The power cards in this set would be weaker than those seen in Magic Ruler, but they would still leave their mark on the game. Nobleman of Crossout was the ultimate answer to flip effect monsters. Premature Burial was designed to be a watered down alternative to Monster Reborn, but over time it would become arguably the more powerful card. Imperial Order was one of the game's first truly powerful Floodgate cards, and it could seemingly win games on its own. Limiter Removal would come to define machine decks for years to come, as its attack doubling effect could be stacked multiple times in one turn. While weak on release, Coldwave would soon come to be known as one of the most unfair cards ever printed. Thousand Eyes Restrict would go on to become one of the most famous monsters in the game, as it would come to define an entire era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Call of the Haunted would be the first card that allowed you to revive monsters on your opponent's turn, and Ceasefire, like Nobleman of Crossout before it, would make a mockery of flip effects. For tech options, Pharaoh's Servant would give us a lot to play with. Time Seal would be the first card to teach us why skipping the draw phase is bad design. Chain Destruction would punish players who used multiple of the same monster in their deck, and would greatly hinder recruiter strategies. Backup Soldier was a nice boon for Exodia decks, and not much else. Goblin Attack Force would be the strongest level 4 monster, and would still see play despite its drawback. Morphing Jar number 2 was far more balanced than its predecessors, but it was also far more annoying. The Fiend Megacybe would be the first high level monster that could special summon itself on your hand when you were at a card disadvantage, making it a precursor to Cyber Dragon. Dust Tornado was a nice budget alternative to Mystical Space Typhoon. Last of all, Gravity Bind was an annoying floodgate that prevented all level 4 and higher monsters from attacking. The limited list for December would add numerous cards from Pharaoh's Servant, most notably Jinzo, whose effect would negate all trap cards on the field. Swords of Revealing Light and Witch of the Black Forest would also be moving from 2 to 1. Instead of a deck list to top off this video, I called on a friend of mine to duel me in the December 2002 format. Just keep in mind, we're not expert players, there are many misplays, but we thought it'd be a cool demonstration for all of you, so enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of my Yu-Gi-Oh! Retrospective. Today we will be looking at 2003, the year Yu-Gi-Oh! Took over the world. At the end of the previous video we saw 2002 end with the release of Pharaoh's Servant. 2002 came at us thick and fast, but 2003 started a lot slower. Players would have to make do with what Konami gave them. Tournament Pack 3 was a decent filler thanks to its reprint of Mechanical Chaser, but it didn't quench the thirst for new cards. After a near half-year wait, our prayers would be finally answered as Konami released Labyrinth of Nightmare in March 2003. Labyrinth of Nightmare was well worth the wait, as it introduced many powerful cards that still see play today. Despite being the MVP of 2002, Mechanical Chaser's days were seemingly numbered, as there was a new level 4 vanilla on the block, with a much higher attack. Gemini Elf power creeped Mechanical Chaser. Its 1900 attack was just enough to get over Mechanical Chaser's 1850. Although Gemini Elf was the chase card, the real stars of the show are the many technical cards that could be found in Labyrinth of Nightmare. All of these cards serve a specific purpose and have gone in and out of play over the last 2 decades. Torrential Tribute began its life as a staple board wipe in almost every deck. Magic Cylinder also began as a staple, but has since dropped off and found a niche in burn decks. Although the card has not seen much play recently, there is always the possibility for Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer to make a return. This spellcaster is an effective floodgate against any deck which specialises in removing cards from play. On release, Card of Safe Return was one of the weaker holofoil cards in this set. Special summoning was not very common in early Yu-Gi-Oh!, and very few decks would special summon more than once per turn. Once the speed of the game picked up, however, this card was a force to be reckoned with. The last warrior from another planet may just be one of the most oppressive creatures in the game. When this fusion monster hits the field, neither player can summon monsters. It may not be commonly played, but there are a multitude of ways to cheat it out in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Jogan the Spiritualist, like Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, is another floodgate spellcaster. While it is on the field, neither player can special summon monsters. As you can probably imagine, the card still occasionally sees play in the combo-heavy world of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Mask of Restrict may not seem very strong now thanks to the overall decline of tribute summoning in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! But trust me when I say that every now and then this card does become a necessity. Finally, Aqua Spirit would be part of a series of monsters in Labyrinth of Nightmare who could all be summoned by removing from play one monster from the graveyard with the same attribute. Aqua Spirit would be special summoned by banishing water monsters. Garuda the Wind Spirit would be special summoned by banishing wind monsters. Spirit of the Flames would be special summoned by banishing fire monsters. And the Rock Spirit would be special summoned by banishing earth monsters. Less than a month after Labyrinth of Nightmare, Konami would release what would be many people's first decks, Starter Deck Pegasus and Starter Deck Joey. These decks came out just as Yu-Gi-Oh! Was exploding in popularity over Europe. Pretty much everyone I knew bought at least one of them. It reprinted many staple cards from Metal Raiders and Magic Ruler, and contained some brand new cards to play with. Starter Deck Joey would contain Penguin Soldier and Scapegoat. Penguin Soldier's flip effect would allow you to send 2 monsters on the field back to the hand, while Scapegoat allowed you to summon 4 goat tokens onto your field. Starter Deck Pegasus would contain Graceful Charity and Griffin Ring. Graceful Charity allowed you to draw 3 cards from your deck, and then discard 2 cards from your hand to the graveyard. When your opponent activates a Harpy's Feather Duster, Griffin Ring negates that Harpy's Feather Duster, and then destroys all spell and trap cards on your opponent's field. There was just one small problem with that effect. Harpy's Feather Duster had not been printed yet. Fortunately for Griffin Ring, Harpy's Feather Duster would be a promo in Yu-Gi-Oh! Worldwide Edition for the Game Boy Advance, releasing less than 3 weeks after the starter decks. Griffin Ring was now playable, but it still wasn't very good. Even if you did resolve Griffin Ring, do you really think the opponent's going to leave all their spell and trap cards on the field before activating Feather Duster? Also included in Worldwide Edition was Sinister Serpent. During your standby phase, if a Sinister Serpent exists in your graveyard, you can return the Sinister Serpent to your hand. With its effect guaranteeing that you would always have a card in hand, Sinister Serpent became an immediate staple. Half a year had now passed since the previous limited list in December 2002, and surprisingly not that much had changed. Graceful Charity, despite being arguably better than Pot of Greed, only went to semi-limited. Sangan and Heavy Storm were moved from semi-limited to limited, and finally only 5 new cards were added to limited. United We Stand and Mage Power for their incredible stat boosting, Harpy's Feather Duster for being one-sided destruction, Magic Cylinder for its ability to steal games, and Sinister Serpent for its ability to retain card advantage. 6 months was a long time, but we wouldn't be waiting long for the next list. Summer 2003 would come at us thick and fast with back-to-back pack releases, starting with Legacy of Darkness. Released in North America on June 6, this was arguably the most powerful expansion since Magic Ruler. It introduced a new subtype to the game in the form of spirit monsters. Several cards in this set would play a role in the eventual creation of the ban list. From this card selection alone, we can see that Legacy of Darkness was a very good set. Creature Swap may not have been as one-sided as Change of Heart or Snatch Steal, but it was permanent. As it turns out, this card has many creative applications, such as giving your opponent a goat token in attack position. Dark Bolter the Terrible had 2 very powerful effects. By paying 1000 life points, it could negate the effect of any normal magic card. On top of that, it would negate the effects of any monsters it destroyed in battle, meaning cards like Sangan would no longer work. Exiled Force has the effect where it contributes itself to destroy one monster on the field. Exiled Force was very good thanks to a little thing called Ignition Priority. What's Priority? Well, back in the day there was this ruling which stated that any monster with an Ignition effect could activate their effect immediately on summon. In the case of Exiled Force, you could tribute it immediately, meaning cards like Trap Hole wouldn't work. The only way to stop Exiled Force would be with a negation card such as Solemn Judgment. For all these reasons, the card was very popular. Now here is a card which is deceptively good. Air Knight Parshaft may seem weak being a level 5 monster with 1900 attack, but its ability to inflict damage over defense and draw cards made it very good against the likes of Spirit Reaper and Scapegoat. Marauding Captain is a level 3 warrior monster who can special summon an additional level 4 or lower monster from your hand. While it is face upon the field, your opponent cannot select any other warrior monster as an attack target. This effect had the potential to lock your opponent, as they could not attack at all if you had 2 Marauding Captains in play at the same time. Blast with Chain is a trap card that can be equipped to a monster to give it a 500 attack boost. Furthermore, if Blast with Chain is destroyed while equipped to a monster, you can destroy 1 card on the field. Smoke Grenade of the Thief is an equipped card that does absolutely nothing, at least until it's destroyed. When this card is destroyed, you can look at your opponent's hand and discard 1 card to the graveyard. These 2 cards would lead to the creation of the Gearfried control deck, a deck which would abuse Gearfried's equipment destruction effect to get the most out of these cards. Drop Off had a very basic but powerful effect. During your opponent's draw phase, your opponent must discard whichever card they just drew. Trin-Headed Behemoth is a monster whose effect caused many ruling issues on release. If Trin-Headed Behemoth is destroyed, you can special summon it from the graveyard at the end of that turn with a reduced attack and defense. The ruling dispute would rise from players running multiple copies of this card. Does the once per duel restriction apply to all copies of Trin-Headed Behemoth, or just the one that used that effect? Because of this ruling dispute, the card would be immediately limited to 1, just to make it clear to players that no, you cannot use multiple Trin-Headed Behemoths in one duel. Finally, Bottomless Trap Hole would be an upgraded version of the original. When your opponent summons a monster with 1500 or more attack, destroy that monster and remove it from play. Unlike the original Trap Hole, this worked on anything, whether it be normal summon, flip summon, or special summon. Overall, Legacy of Darkness contained many good cards, but the real stars of the show would be these 4. Ashura Priest, Injection Fairy Lily, Dark Ruler Hades, and Reinforcement of the Army. Ashura Priest can attack each monster your opponent controls once each. Injection Fairy Lily can pay 2,000 life points to gain 3,000 attack. Dark Ruler Hades negates the effects of all monsters destroyed by fiends. And Reinforcement of the Army can search any low-level warrior monster from your deck. The combined utility of these cards allows you to out just about any monster your opponent throws at you. Legacy of Darkness is fondly remembered for what it brought to the game. But it is also something of a double-edged sword. These 4 abominations would be some of the worst assigned cards ever printed. Fiber Jar would force both players to shuffle their hands, fields and graveyards into the deck. Each player would then draw 5 new cards, soft resetting the game state. Yatagarasu had the effect where, if it inflicts damage to your opponent's life points, the opponent skips their next draw phase. Like all spirit monsters, Yatagarasu returned to the hand at the end phase. Combined, these effects would form the foundation of the Yatalock, a game state where the opponent could not draw any cards to deal with Yatagarasu, as it continuously retreated into the safety of its owner's hand. Royal Oppression was basically Imperial Order but for special summons. While not a problem in 2003, this card would eventually become a big deal. And finally we have Last Turn, one of the most ridiculous trap cards ever printed. This card can only be activated during your opponent's turn when your life points are 1000 or less. Select one monster on your side of the field and send all other cards on the field and in their respective owner's hands to their respective graveyards. Your opponent must then special summon one monster from his or her deck in face-up attack position and attack your selected monster. Any battle damage from this battle is treated as 0. The player whose monster remains alone on the field at the end phase of this turn wins the duel. Any other case results in a draw. While you continue to wrap your head around that long-winded and convoluted effect, let me ask you a question. What would happen if you activated Last Turn while controlling Jogan the Spiritualist? Jogan's effect prevents players from special summoning monsters. The effect of Last Turn requires the opponent to special summon a monster. If the opponent cannot special summon a monster, they lose the duel. That Last Turn was printed when such a thing was already possible, makes this an absolute failure of game design. May these 4 cards never be allowed to run rampant in the game ever again. 6 weeks after Legacy of Darkness, Pharaonic Guardian would drop, making it the last expansion before the first Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship. This Egypt-themed pack would have a heavy focus on flip summoning and zombies. Like Legacy of Darkness before it, Pharaonic Guardian would be incredibly strong for its time. The high defense stat of Gravekeeper's Spy, coupled with its ability to summon more Gravekeepers from the deck, would make it one of the best defensive cards of the Duel Monsters era. Book of Moon to this day remains one of the best designed cards in the game. Its utility as a quick play gives it an almost uncountable number of useful applications. Its defense, disruption, evasion, and a combo piece all in one card. Not bad for a card that just flips monsters face down. When Pyramid Turtle is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon a zombie type monster with 2000 or less defense from your deck. This was an awesome recruiter that gave you access to almost every zombie in the game. Swarm of Locusts had the effect where, when it is flip summoned, you can target and destroy one magical trap card on the field. When this monster is face up on the field, you can set it back down in defense position. Just to make a distinction here, that's flip summoned, not flipped. This card, alongside its monster destroying counterpart, would form the basis of what would be known as the Pac-Man deck. Necrophaly is a field magic card whose effect changes depending on which printing of the card you own. The card's original printing reads, as long as this card remains face up on the field, all effects of magic, trap, and or effect monster cards that involve graveyards are negated, and neither player can remove cards in the graveyards from play. In addition, increase the attack and defense of all monsters that include Gravekeepers in their card name by 500 points. For contrast, here is the most recent printing of the card. All Gravekeeper's monsters gain 500 attack and defense. Cards in the graveyard cannot be banished. Negate any card effect that would move a card in the graveyard to a different place. Negate any card effect that changes types or attributes in the graveyard. As you might have noticed, these are two completely different effects. The old Necrophaly negated any card that interacted with the graveyard. So for example, a monster such as Chaos Necromancer, who gains 300 attack points for each monster in the graveyard, would have its effect negated. However, under modern Necrophaly, this effect would not be negated, as it does not attempt to move any cards from the graveyard to somewhere else. Necrophaly is a good case study in the evolution of problem-solving card techs, and how game mechanics can change over time. A combo piece to go with Necrophaly would be Royal Tribute. This card can only be activated when your Necrophaly is active on the field. Both players must discard all monsters in their hand. With everything we know about Necrophaly, you can imagine just how devastating this card can be. Digging deeper into Pharaonic Guardian, we can see just how much utility its card pool had. Spirit Reaper could not be destroyed by battle, but it would be destroyed if targeted by a card effect. If Spirit Reaper attacks directly, the opponent must randomly discard one card from their hand. Barrage of Nightmare was easily the most broken card in the set. During your opponent's standby phase, draw until you have 4 cards in your hand. During your own standby phase, randomly discard the same number of cards you drew. At face value, this card may seem balanced, but it has a very large exploit. If Mirage of Nightmare is destroyed before or during your standby phase by the likes of Mystical Space Typhoon, you do not have to discard any of the cards you drew. The potential to go +3 in card advantage is what made this card so good. Reasoning. Your opponent calls a monster level. You then mill cards from the top of your deck until a monster is found. If that monster's level is the number called by the opponent, send it to the graveyard. If not, special summon it. Then, send all other milled cards to the graveyard. With its ability to burn through the deck quickly, Reasoning would be utilised in numerous combo and turbo decks. Don Salug is a dark level 4 warrior type monster who gains one of 2 effects when it inflicts battle damage. It can either discard 1 card from the opponent's hand at random, or send the top 2 cards of the opponent's deck to the graveyard. Metamorphosis is a very powerful magic card that allows you to tribute 1 monster you control to special summon 1 fusion monster of the same level from your fusion deck. This card was simply incredible, as it gave players easy access to some of the most powerful monsters in the game. Raigeki Break. Discard 1 card to destroy 1 card on the field. This may seem like a slower tribute to the Doomed, but the option to select any card type alongside its utility as a trap made it excellent disruption when going first. Reckless Greed. Draw 2 cards from your deck and skip your next 2 draw phases. Here we have another deceptively good card. Imagine for a moment that you activate 3 copies of Reckless Greed in 1 turn. You skip your next 6 draw phases, right? Wrong, you only skip 2. The effect doesn't stack. Better yet, you could activate Reckless Greed on your turn, draw the other 2 copies of Reckless Greed, and then activate them on your opponent's turn. Either way, you're still getting 6 cards at the cost of 2 draw phases. Famous for its appearance in the anime, Lava Golem was a unique monster that could be special summoned to your opponent's side of the field by tributing 2 monsters they controlled. Lava Golem would inflict 1000 points of damage to the opponent during each of their standby phases. You cannot normal summon a monster on the turn you special summon this card. Lava Golem may seem like a risky trade-off because of its high attack, but tributing your opponent's monsters is one of the best forms of monster removal in the game. Terraforming. Add 1 field magic card from your deck to your hand. With the exception of Necrophaly, field spell cards in 2003 tended to be very lackluster. Today, however, they're among some of the best cards in the game. Ring of Destruction. Destroy one face-up monster on the field and inflict burn damage to each player equal to that monster's attack. This card was one of the best forms of monster removal in the game and could easily steal duels from your opponent. Move over, Magic Cylinder, there's a new cheese card in town. With all that said and done, we would have what would be the limited list going into the 2003 World Championship. Ring of Destruction, Fiber Jar, Exiled Force, Twin-Headed Behemoth, Injection Fairy Lily, Reckless Greed, Yatagarasu, and Mirage of Nightmare would all go to limited. Marauding Captain, Last Turn, Creature Swap, and Reinforcement of the Army would go to 2. And finally, for the first time ever, we would see cards leave the list as Limiter Removal and Backup Soldier went to 3. And so it came to be. Less than 18 months on from its international debut, we would see the first Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship held at Madison Square Garden on August 10th, 2003. This tournament would be huge, as players from around the globe would pit their skills against each other for the first time ever. What you are seeing here is documented footage of the event as finalists battled it out in front of a packed studio audience. These players were the best in the world and they put their skills on show for the live MSG crowd, and they were there for one thing and one thing only: to win. These matches allowed spectators to witness the highest level of play, a spectacle we now take for granted thanks to the emergence of video sharing sites such as YouTube. Cards weren't the only thing on the menu that day, as the event would also host the finals for the Worldwide Edition Video Game Championship. If you would like to see more footage, you can find a link in the video description. The spectacle of the World Championship is all well and good, but we're here for the deck profiles. The first World Championship would be run by Hong Kong native Eungyu Leung, whose hand destruction build dominated the tournament. This list is an excellent example of optimal deck building, as all the power cards were ran at max. Gemini Elf was ran at 3 for beatdown, and Mystic Tomato was ran at 3 for better access to Rich the Black Forest and Sangan. Delinquent Duo, Confiscation, the Forceful Sentry, Double Don Salug and Triple Drop-Off were ran for full hand control. Once the opponent's hand was empty, Yatagarasu would be used to finish them off. Of the 41 cards in the deck, 24 were limited to 1. Such was the hold these cards had over the game. Leung's side deck would be made to counter all 3 popular deck types. Electric Snake would heavily punish opponents who went for blind discards. Air Knight Parshath and Exiled Force would be good against stall players. Book of Moon and Torrential Tribute playsets would put a halt to beatdown decks. In 2003, decks simply didn't come any better than this. Second place would go to Japanese representative Kitamura Shigeki. Shigeki would opt for a less focused version of hand destruction, choosing to round his deck out with more generic cards. The build was less concerned with emptying the opponent's hand, and was equally capable of playing pure beatdown. Instead of playsets to counter specific strategies, the side deck would consist of mostly one-offs. This gave Shigeki more flexibility when altering his deck between duels. Out of all the decks in top 8, Shigeki and Leung would be the only players opting to run Mystic Tomato. Of the 40 cards in this deck, 25 were limited. Another intriguing feature of Shigeki's build was the choice to run Sombra the Dark and Bazu the Soul Eater. In a format dominated by Gemini Elf, Sombra and Bazu were 2 of the most reliable monsters for attacking over it. Third place would be taken by US representative Mike Rosenberg. Looking at the creature selection, we can see that this build is quite a departure from the Asian players. No Gemini Elf, and no Mystic Tomato. Instead, we have Spear Dragons and Nimble Momungas. Instead of Don Salug, Spirit Reaper would take up the mantle of monster-based hand destruction. Back row cards such as Mystical Space Typhoon and Drop-Off would be ran at 2 instead of 3. Compared to the other finalists, this side deck would be very experimental, containing cards such as Trap of the Border Raiser, Dark Coffin, and Forced Requisition. That said, the use of double trap dust shoot would be years ahead of the curve. Overall, 40 of the 24 cards in the main deck were limited. And that is the story of the first Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship, at least a short version of the story anyway. The 2003 World Championship had come to an end, and it was business as usual from here on out as Konami released Tournament Pack 4. This pack would contain a reprint of the elusive Morphing Jar, as well as the printing of a brand new trap card, Royal Decree. This new card would quickly see play, as its ability to negate all trap cards on the field while face up made it a decent alternative to Jinzo. With the summer of Yu-Gi-Oh! At an end, Konami would mark the beginning of their holiday lineup with the release of Magician's Force on October 10th, 2003. This set would introduce the new Union Monster and Spell Counter mechanics, and have a heavy emphasis on Spellcaster monsters. It was also the first set to use the term spell card, with use of the word magic being retired from here on out. Magician's Force would be a big deal among anime fans, as it contained the long-awaited first printing of the Dark Magician Girl. Furthermore, a production error on Dark Paladin's first printing would attract the interest of collectors, as the card released with the wrong artwork. Here is what it's supposed to look like. Magician's Force looked like a modest set at first glance, but take a closer look and whoo, these cards pack a punch. Wave Motion Cannon, Old Vindictive Magician, Skilled Dark Magician, Royal Magical Library, Mash Driver, Kaiser Colosseum, and My Body as a Shield would see play in all kinds of decks. But the real stars of the show, at least at the time, were Tribe Infecting Virus, Breaker the Magical Warrior, and Magical Scientist. Tribe's ability to wipe boards of entire monster types made it an excellent removal card. Breaker's spell counter effect not only allowed it to rival Gemini Elf for sheer power, but it also made it a mystical space typhoon on legs, as it could remove that spell counter to destroy one spell or trap card your opponent controlled. Magical Scientist had the rather broken effect where you could pay 1000 life points to special summon one level 6 or lower fusion monster from your fusion deck. That fusion monster cannot attack, and it returns to the fusion deck at the end of the turn. At face value, this card seems terrible, but its effect was not once per turn, and when combined with certain other cards, it led to some very degenerate and broken combos. Here is the limited list for November 2003. The only inclusions of great note are Breaker and Tribe Infecting Virus, both going to limited. November 2003 would also mark the release of the iconic Yu-Gi-Oh! Power of Chaos PC games. This game would come in 3 flavors: Yugi the Destiny, Joey the Passion, and Kaiba the Revenge. The version we're interested in is Yugi the Destiny, as it contained the promo card Anti-Spell Fragrance. As long as this card remains face up on the field, both players must first set spell cards when they use them, and cannot activate them until their next turn. Anti-Spell might not be on the power level of Imperial Order, but it was an excellent card. Anyone who played Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout 2018 will know just how essential this card was at the time. You absolutely needed it. We've now reached the end of 2003 and Konami closed it off with the release of Dark Crisis on December 1st. This set would take many cards from the anime filler arcs, namely the Virtual World and Orichalcos Saga. Compared to other sets that had released in 2003, its general power level was quite low. Appearances can be deceiving, however. Little did we know of the madness that was on the horizon. Dark Crisis was very much a product of its time. The cards in this set were very good in the initial years of Yu-Gi-Oh!, but have not seen much play since. DD Warrior Lady, Sakuretsu Armor, Reflect Bounder, Kaiser Glider, Tsukuyomi, and Vampire Lord are all cards you may be very well familiar with if you were actively playing in 2004 and 2005. Ojama Trio, Spell Reproduction, and Drag Down into the Grave would all find their places in very specific decks. An exception among these cards would be Skill Drain, a card with the ability to negate the effects of all face-up monsters on the field. 17 years later, Skill Drain is still easily one of the most powerful floodgate cards in the game. And so we have reached the end of 2003. Just like with 2002, we're going to finish off with some exhibition duels between myself and a friend. We are not experts, so do expect to see some misplays. Enjoy.
Psych!
Another one. Another one. Another one. Nope.
Read, nigga, read!
Another one.
Yes, 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 yes! I can win! I feel great! I can do this!
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of A Comprehensive History of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. Today we're looking at 2004, the year where things got really crazy. At the end of our previous episode, we saw 2003 close off with the release of Dark Crisis. As such, 2004 would begin with adjustments to the limited list. Vampire Lord, Reflect Bounder, and Butterfly Dagger Elmer from Dark Crisis would be joining the list at limited. Meanwhile, in semi-limited, we would see Morphin Jar go from 1 to 2. As we can see at this point, the limited list is just overloaded. There are 48 cards in total that are limited to 1. This overabundance of game changers and power cards just wasn't healthy or sustainable. Eventually, something was gonna give. And give it would. March 1st, 2004. That was the day Yu-Gi-Oh! Changed forever. The invasion of chaos had arrived. It is no exaggeration to say the set was massive for its time. There are so many strong cards in this set that I can't possibly begin to list them all here. So here's some samples of how this set outdid everything that came before it. Dark Magician of Chaos had the effect where, when it's summoned, add 1 spell card from your graveyard to your hand. Any monster this card destroys by battle is removed from play, and when this card leaves the field, remove it from play. That might seem kind of tame, but once you see this card in action, you will realize it's one of the most broken, degenerate cards ever printed. Chaos Sorcerer. This card can only be special summoned by banishing 1 light and 1 dark monster from your graveyard. Once per turn, you can remove 1 face-up monster on the field from play. This card cannot attack the turn you use this effect. Black Luster Soldier. Envoy of the Beginning. This card can only be special summoned by removing 1 light and 1 dark monster in your graveyard from play. Once during each of your turns, you can apply one of the following effects. Remove one monster on the field from play. This card cannot attack the turn you use this effect. If this card destroyed your opponent's monster by battle and sent it to the graveyard, it can attack again once in a row. If Chaos Sorcerer sounds garbage in comparison to this, then you're right, it was. BLS Envoy was so powerful that you didn't even need to play Chaos Sorcerer. Not only was its banishing effect better than Chaos Sorcerer's because it could target face-down monsters, but BLS was also a game ender, thanks to its ability to attack twice. This is, without question, the most powerful monster in the game so far. And yet, we can still go one better. Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End. This card cannot be normal summoned or set. This card can only be special summoned by removing from play one light and one dark monster in your graveyard. By paying 1000 life points, send all cards in both players' hands and fields to the graveyard. Inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent's life points for each card that is sent to the graveyard by this effect. Holy hot damn. This is the most busted Yu-Gi-Oh card effect ever. It doesn't just nuke the field, but it nukes the hands as well? How do you even top the power level of this card? If there was a tier list for monster cards based on their individual power in a vacuum, this would be in God tier. There is simply no other monster in the game who can match this destructive power. What an absolute beast of a card. So as we can see, Invasion of Chaos was an absolute revelation for the game, and players couldn't wait to get their hands on these new cards. Manticore of Darkness is one of those cards they should have read again before releasing. During the end phase of the turn this card is sent to the graveyard, send one Beast, Beast Warrior, or Wing Beast type monster card from your hand or side of the field to the graveyard to special summon this card from the graveyard. Sounds good, doesn't it? Well, what if you play two of them? You've just created a loop, as you send one Manticore to the graveyard to special summon a Manticore from the graveyard. You then send that Manticore to the graveyard to special summon the other Manticore from the graveyard, and you just keep going and going and going. It is an infinite loop. Manju of the 10,000 Hands. When this card is normal summoned or flip summoned, you can select one ritual monster card or one ritual spell card from your deck and add it to your hand. This love child of Senju and Sonic Bird would be a staple in ritual decks for years to come. Stealth Bird functioned just like the Desert Locust from Pharaonic Guardian, but instead of eating your opponent's cards, it was eating their life points, 1000 at a time. You best believe there were stall decks built around this little birdie. Gren Marju da Aiza. The attack and defense of this card become the number of your cards that are removed from play times 400 points. This card was terrible. And then Pot of the Sires happened. Strike Ninja was a retrain of a really bad level 5 vanilla monster from starter deck Yugi. This level 4 warrior had the effect where you could banish it from the field on either player's turn by removing two dark monsters in your graveyard from play. Going temporarily negative in card advantage doesn't seem like a very good effect, but trust me, this card had some combos. Berserk Gorilla was a 2000 attack level 4 beast monster, and its only downside was it had to always attack if able, and if this card is in face-up defense position, destroy it. Of all the low-level monsters who traded a high attack for a negative drawback, Berserk Gorilla was easily the best yet. If this card hit the field, your opponent had to get rid of it. Dimension Fusion and Self-Destruct Button. These are two cards that should have never gotten past playtesting. In the case of Dimension Fusion, pay 2000 life points. Both players special summon as many of their removed from play monsters as possible. Remember Dark Magician of Chaos? Remember Strike Ninja? Remember all those cards you removed from play for Blackluster Soldier? Once you've filled up your banish pile with monsters, you can just drop this and fill the field in one swoop. This card was absolutely mental, and you will lose your minds when you see some of the stuff that could be done with it. Self-Destruct Button. You can only activate this card when your life points are lower than your opponent's life points and the difference is 7000 points or more. Both players' life points become 0. It's just stupid. It's just a stupid card. Why would you allow players to reset games because they're losing? If Invasion of Chaos was the only thing that had released on March 1st, we could have called it IOC Day. But it wasn't. There was something else also released that day. Starter Deck Evolution, Yugi and Kaiba. Quite frankly, these decks were not very good. Forgive me for a moment if I can't help but point out the hilarity of releasing both versions of Blackluster Soldier on the same day. That all said, these decks did introduce a surprisingly good card into the game. Last Will was a spell card whose effect could only be used once per turn. When a monster on your side of the field is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one monster with 1500 attack points or less from your deck. At face value, this card might seem to be lacking in utility. Normally, such recruitment effects were designed to take advantage of your opponent destroying your monsters by battle. Instead, Last Will was asking you to send monsters on your turn. So what, were you just going to ram your monsters into your opponent and then summon something? Nah, the card was way better than that. Tribute summoning, tributing for effects, fusion summons, anything you want, last turn will be triggered by it. And as we'll soon come to find, there's some pretty big upsides that come with being able to summon any low attack monster from your deck. March 23rd would see the release of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Dawn of Destiny for the original Xbox, and with it came widespread ruin. You can only activate this card when your opponent declares an attack. Destroy one monster with the highest attack among your opponent's attack position monsters. Considering how popular Sakuretsu Armor had become among players, the option to have what was essentially a fourth copy in your deck wasn't too bad. So here we are, the April 2004 limited list. This game has taken all it can stand and it can't stand no more. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been completely broken, and yet, despite the absurd power levels seen in Invasion of Chaos, only 3 cards joined the list. Manticore of Darkness went to semi-limited, while Chaos Emperor Dragon and Blackluster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning went to limited. New set releases would begin to slow down from this point on, as the TCG had closed the gap with its Japanese counterpart. Released June 1st, 2004, Ancient Sanctuary would mark the end of the Duel Monsters era. Up until now, all TCG set releases had been compilations of packs from the OCG, combining 2 sets of cards into one. After this, packs would follow the same structure as the OCG, making Ancient Sanctuary the last core set to contain secret rares for the next couple of years. Ancient Sanctuary itself would be quite tame, especially when compared to Invasion of Chaos. That said, it still contained some decent cards. It introduced the Monarch and Agent archetypes, as well as strong utility cards such as Monster Gate, Enemy Controller, Wall of Revealing Light, and Night Assailant. The following month would see the 2004 World Championships be held in Los Angeles. Compared to 2003, it was a much milder affair as Madison Square Garden was swapped for a more conventional venue. Unchanged from 2003, however, was the choice to cater to both the TCG and the video games. Much like last year, we would see the crowning of 2 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Champions. A cool thing about this coverage in particular was the interviews with attendees, not the tournament players, but just common people.
A lot of the parents say that when we go to tournaments, they like their kids playing because it not only develops their intelligence, but also their math with using a computer. And even the 5- and 6-year-olds that can't read, the parents will read for them, and the kids will memorize and then use it when they play.
Great game! Fun. The cards are cool, really cool looking. And there are a lot of people who play it nationwide, so when I come to the World Championship, I get to play people who maybe I can never play again. And that gives you a good feeling.
This kid here knows what's up. We'd all be wise to take his advice on board. So that was the 2004 World Championship, and these are the deck lists. In first place we have Togawa Masatoshi, hailing from Japan. Chaos was the deck to beat in 2004. Masatoshi's deck focused on taking all the best cards available at the time and using them to fuel the summons of Blackluster Soldier and Chaos Emperor Dragon. You may have also noticed that certain power cards are absent from this deck. That's because the 2004 World Championship merged the limited list of the TCG and the new forbidden list of the OCG. Yep, in Japan it had finally happened. They were banning cards from sanctioned play. The likes of Delinquent Duo, Raigeki, Harpy's Feather Duster, Painful Choice, and Yatagarasu would not be making an appearance at this tournament. With many of the game's strongest power cards banned, we saw players going hard on what was available. DD Warrior Lady and Mystical Space Typhoon were absolute must-haves, as many players opted to run multiples of each. For Masatoshi's build, he opted to run double Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. Why Kaiku? Anyone who entered that tournament with ambitions of winning were probably running the Chaos cards. That made Kaiku the perfect counter, as it prevented your opponent from removing cards from play. The side deck itself is pretty standard, but Book of Moon is there once again showing its incredible utility as a card. 3 copies ran in the side. 2004's runner-up would be Hong Kong representative Chan Wan Hang, who was also running Chaos. Even so, this Chaos deck would be less focused than Masatoshi's, running Earth monsters such as Berserk Gorilla and Exiled Force. The deck ran 41 cards, but that didn't matter much for drawing as Reinforcement of the Army was basically a freebie. When comparing the 2004 decks to the previous year, deck building standards hadn't really changed much. Optimal deck building was still just pretty much a mixture of generic strong cards. It's not like today where some decks live and die off their card synergy. Finally, just to get the elephant out of the room, yes, that is a Dark Magician Girl in the side deck. It was a very valuable and expensive card back then. He probably took it for luck. Surikane Yoshinobu would be the recipient of that year's bronze medal as he entered with a very different kind of Chaos deck. Apprentice Magician from Magician's Force would be used to search Magician of Faith on the deck. Try saying that fast. Kuribo in the main seems like an absolute bonkers choice, but in all fairness it protected from Air Knight Parshaf, Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, Spirit Reaper, and Don Salug. Your opponent couldn't use their effects if they didn't inflict damage. Even more shocking than the Kuribo, however, is the lack of hand destruction cards in the main. No Confiscation or Forceful Sentry. This deck went all in on field control. It didn't care what cards the opponent had in their hand. Even the side deck was focused mainly on field control. As we can see in the photo, this is indeed the 3rd place prize from the 2004 World Championship. The main prizes that year were gold, silver and bronze replicas of the tablet from the anime. Before we move on from the World Championship, I just want to give a shout out to 4th place British representative Ryan Pugh. When I saw this deck, I couldn't believe it had gotten so far. This isn't a dig at Pugh either. From the list, we can clearly see that he was at a card selection disadvantage compared to his competitors. The deck overall feels like a mismatch of the 2003 and 2004 World Championship deck lists. Out of the decks to make the top cut, it stands out like a sore thumb, and I respect its achievement of 4th place. Finally, shout outs to the Canadian player who showed up with a 60 card fusion deck. Another year, another World Championship out the way, another pack, another broken card to play with. Return from the Different Dimension was more or less a trap version of Dimension Fusion. By paying half their life points, players could special summon as many of their own removed from play monsters as possible. During the end phase, all of those monsters are once again removed from play. While it may have lacked the immediate utility of Dimension Fusion, Return was in some respects the better card. It may not have had the combo potential, but it could be splashed in almost any deck that was utilising a Chaos strategy. The card would bring about the creation of the Return deck. Builds focused on reviving as many of their remove from play cards as possible to push for game. Finally, unlike Dimension Fusion, it didn't revive your opponent's monsters. With such easy utility, Return from the Different Dimension would see play for years to come. Also featuring an exclusive pack was Inferno Tempest. When you take 3000 or more battle damage from one attack, you can activate this card. Remove all monsters in each player's decks and graveyards from play. This card did not see the widespread use that Return did, but it was a cool play to pull off thanks to its devastating effect. Return from the different dimension would just be another piece to add to the pile of brokenness that was Yu-Gi-Oh! The game was totally out of control. Not only did you have Chaos Yatterlock, but you had degenerate combo decks, turbo decks, one-turn kill decks, and FTKs such as Magical Scientist and Last Turn. The Magical Scientist FTK burned your opponent to death by summoning fusion monsters that were then tributed with Catapult Turtle. For the Last Turn OTK, you brought out Jogan the Spiritualist and then flipped Last Turn on your opponent's main phase to automatically win the duel. These decks alongside a handful of others showed that Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game had been completely broken. The game was in a very unhealthy state and something had to be done. August 25th, 2004. Remember the day, for it is when Konami finally put their foot down. Yatagarasu, Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, Chaos Emperor Dragon, Mirror Force, Imperial Order, Dark Hole, Raigeki, United We Stand, Monster Reborn, Graceful Charity, Harpy's Feather Duster, and Delinquent Duo would all be banned, forbidding players from using them in competitive play. The list would be controversial to say the least. While the bans for the likes of Yatagarasu, Chaos Emperor Dragon and Imperial Order were warranted, some players were outraged when the likes of Mirror Force also joined them. Konami decided Mirror Force and United We Stand were the problem cards when the likes of Fiber Jar, Painful Choice and Magical Scientist existed. The list had slapped down Chaos decks and put an end to the Yatterlock, but the likes of the Magical Scientist FTK and Last Turn OTK were still out there. Regardless, it was a time of change for the game, not only in how cards were regulated, but also in how cards were released. Soul of the Duelist would debut on October 1st, 2004. It would be the first booster pack of the GX series. The pack would bring many changes to how boosters were handled for the next couple of years. A lot can be said about the differences between secret rares and ultimate rares, but ultimately it comes down to preference. They're both very nice rarities. Soul of the Duelist was the smallest expansion to the game to date, containing only 60 cards. This is because TCG packs were no longer compilations of OCG sets. The cards they got on the OCG would be the cards we would be getting as well. Compared to the previous handful of sets, Soul of the Duelist was very underpowered. Meta highlights in this pack would be the likes of Hammershot, Mobius the Frost Monarch, and Mind Crush. That same month would see a minor tweak to the Forbidden Unlimited list. Morphing Jar, Protector of the Sanctuary, Mystical Space Typhoon, Torrential Tribute, and Dark Magician of Chaos would all go to 1. If you thought the cards on this list were bad enough already, let me tell you, you ain't seen nothing yet. October would also see the release of Dark Beginning 1, a compilation set containing cards from Legend of Blue Eyes, Metal Raiders, Magic Ruler, Pharaoh's Servant, and Labyrinth of Nightmare. Also included in Dark Beginning was the brand new card, Makuya the Destructor. During the turn this card is sent to the graveyard, the owner of this card can activate trap cards from their hand. There are two types of people: those who don't see the problem with this card's effect, and those who realise just how destructively game-breaking it is. Trap cards don't have immediate activation for a reason. By design, trap cards are slow to compensate for their often powerful effects. Take away that restriction and you get a game state more degenerate than anything that has come before or since. You'd think that would be October wrapped up, but we're not done yet. We still have one more card to talk about. Coming out on October 26 was Yu-Gi-Oh! Destiny Board Traveler for the Game Boy Advance, possibly the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Game ever made. But it did include one important card, DD Assailant. DD Assailant is a level 4 Earth Warrior monster with 1700 attack and 1600 defense with the effect that, when it is destroyed in battle by an opponent's monster, remove both cards from play. DD Assailant wasn't quite as good as Warrior Lady, but it would still see its fair share of play. Carrying on with the video game theme was the release of Yu-Gi-Oh! Capsule Monster Coliseum for the PlayStation 2 on November 26, 2004. CMC was a turn-based strategy game where you moved units across a board, not unlike Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy Tactics, and chess. Jokes aside, this game also contained a decently strong card in the form of Abyss Soldier. Discard one water monster from your hand to the graveyard, return one card on the field to the opponent's hand. You can only use this effect once per turn during your main phase. For an 1800 attack beat stick, this was a decent effect, and it had obvious synergy with Sinister Serpent. Topping off 2004 would be the release of Rise of Destiny. It was the first set to have a sneak preview, and the last main set to feature Yugi on the cover. The pack would be the final release before the first ever Shonen Jump Championship tournament, and it is probably best remembered for expanding the Monarch and Harpy families. Cards of note in this set were Machine Duplication, Fusula Dragon, Festeros the Firestorm Monarch, and Dekochi, the Battle Charge Locomotive. Machine Duplication allowed you to target a machine monster with 500 or less attack, and summon 2 more copies of that card from your deck. Unsurprisingly, the ability to special summon 2 monsters from your deck turned out to be very powerful, and the card still sees play today. Fusula Dragon was a level 7 monster who could be normal summoned, but his attack and defense was halved. That might not seem very good, but its level made it an amazing metamorphosis target. When tribute summoned, Festeros the Firestorm Monarch would randomly discard 1 card from your opponent's hand. Then, if that card was a monster, you burnt your opponent for 200 damage times the monster's level. The Kochi was a flip effect monster who let you draw an additional card from your deck. That might seem tame, but its attribute made it perfect fuel for Chaos decks. December 4th, 2004 would see the debut of the Shonen Jump Championship, a precursor to what we now know as the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series. The Shonen Jump Championships were a series of sanctioned events by Konami that took place all over the United States. The regular occurrence of these events made it the closest thing players had to a national circuit. Players from across America would swarm to these events and go head-to-head to prove who was the best. John Umali would be the first Shonen Jump champion, placing first at GenCon. SJC event winners would receive a copy of Cyberstein as a prize. Cyberstein was an incredibly powerful effect monster who allowed you to pay 5,000 life points to special summon any one fusion monster from your fusion deck. The card's power alongside its scarcity as a prize card made it incredibly valuable. So that's it for 2004. Normally this is where I'd show some Duel replays, but quite frankly, me and my friend absolutely hated playing the Chaos format. So instead, here's a compilation of degenerate and broken combo decks. Enjoy! Welcome once again to a comprehensive history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. Today we will be talking about 2005, a year responsible for one of the most popular formats in the game's history. 2005 would begin with a whimper rather than a boom, as we saw the release of the first structure decks, Structure Deck Zombie Madness and Structure Deck Dragon's Roar. Unlike the starter decks of previous years, structure decks would stick to a specific theme. Neither of these first two structure decks were considered very powerful. In fact, Dragon's Roar was a complete flop. Zombie Madness, on the other hand, would give players easy access to some decently strong cards. They may not have made the greatest first impression, but eventually structure decks would become one of the biggest game changers out there. A year one for Invasion of Chaos, March would continue to be the month of big hitters as we got Flaming Eternity. This set was a massive improvement over Soul of the Duelist and Rise of Destiny. The pack contained the first lineup of cards that would come to see play for years to come. While not quite as broken as the card that would inspire it, Deck Devastation Virus would still give you a huge advantage over your opponent if you could get it off. As a level 8 fusion monster, Gatling Dragon would be a popular metamorphosis target. Felix Ring Wind Blast would power creep the likes of Raigeki Break by putting your opponent's cards on the top of their deck instead of the graveyard. Putting your opponent's cards where they can draw them back may not seem that good, but against tribute decks such as Monarchs it was devastating and would kill your opponent's hands. Rescue Cat had the extremely powerful effect where it could tribute itself to special summon 2 low-level beast monsters from your deck. With the anything goes nature of this game's card pool, it was only a matter of time before this became absolutely broken. Armed Samurai Benkei was the type of card you could build an entire deck around, and we will see an example of such a deck later in this video. Lightning Vortex was designed to be a weaker version of Raigeki after it had been banned the previous year. Even so, this card still had a very powerful effect where you could discard one card from your hand to destroy all face-up monsters your opponent controlled. Sacred Felix of Nephis was the cover card of Flaming Eternity, and it had one hell of a good effect. If this card is destroyed by card effect, special summon this card during your standby phase. If special summon this way, destroy all spell and trap cards on the field. This thing was like Vampire Lord on steroids. Having a 2400 attack beat stick that could revive itself was one thing, but being able to destroy your opponent's back row on top of that was absolutely insane. Players would quickly discover just how powerful this card was. Depending on how you look at it, Swords of Concealing Light was either a stronger or weaker version of Swords of Revealing Light. Swords of Revealing Light would flip monsters face up and prevent them from attacking for 3 turns. Swords of Concealing Light would instead flip monsters face down and prevent them from changing their position for 2 turns. In a vacuum, Concealing Light was the weaker card, but in reality it would go on to see play far longer than Revealing Light ever did. The Monarch family would see a new addition in the form of Grandmog. Grandmog wasn't a bad card, it's just it didn't do anything the pre-existing Monarchs couldn't already do. Finally, we would see the addition of one of the game's most notorious stall cards in the form of Threatening Roar. Your opponent cannot declare an attack during this turn. That's it, that's the card. Just make sure you activate it before your opponent declares, otherwise it's not stopping anything. February would see the release of yet another Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship video game. Yu-Gi-Oh! 7 Trials to Glory World Championship Tournament 2005. Much like last year's release, this game once again expanded the card pool ready for the 2005 World Championship. On top of that, the game included a copy of Mind Control, a card designed to be a powered down version of Change of Heart. Even so, it was still a pretty powerful card, and currently sits on the limited list today. April 2005 would bring about that year's first update to the Forbidden Unlimited list. The Forceful Sentry, Painful Choice, Change of Heart, Magical Scientist, Fiber Jar, Mercuria the Destructor, Mirage of Nightmare, Confiscation, and Butterfly Dagger Elmer would all be banned. Sacred Felix of Nephis, Lightning Vortex, and Deck Devastation Fires would all immediately go to 1. Semi-Limited would see a huge shuffle, Morphing Jar went back to 1, whilst Emergency Provisions, Good Goblin Housekeeping, Level Limit Area A, Dark Scorpion Chick the Yellow, Night Assailant, Gravity Bind, Abyss Soldier, Upstart Goblin, and Vampire Lord all went to 2. Finally, Morphing Jar number 2 would be released from the list altogether, because it simply wasn't relevant. This list would give the game a big shake-up, and signal the beginning of one of the most beloved eras in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. April 2005 would give us GOAT format, widely considered one of the greatest formats ever made. A format named such thanks to the heavy use of the card Scapegoat. The Metamorphosis Thousand Eyes Restrict combo would see GOAT Control become the top deck of the format. Despite its namesake, GOAT format was a very diverse meta, and it is still played today by a growing community of competitive and skilled players. So you may be asking, what makes this format in particular so special? Well, for one, it's nostalgic. People like to turn for it when they're looking for that old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Fix. It's easy to comprehend too, as many of the cards have short and basic effects. The only extra deck monster type available are fusion monsters. Synchro, Exceed, Pendulum, and Link cards did not exist yet. The format also has a reputation for rewarding players with solid fundamentals and strong long-term decision making. The timing of your plays matters just as much as the plays themselves, if not more so, as your decisions can easily come back to bite you later on. The GOAT Control mirror match itself is considered one of the most decision heavy in the game. Players will need to outthink their opponents just as much as they will need to outplay them. These cards are old, and many of them don't even see play anymore due to power creep or banning. With how popular Yu-Gi-Oh! Was in the early 2000s, there's a good chance you already own many of the cards you need to play. It's a really cheap format. Finally, it is a diverse format where GOAT Control has plenty to rival it. Chaos is a popular alternative to GOAT, and many now consider it to be the best deck in the format. Animal-themed decks such as Beast Beatdown are able to run over your opponent's monsters and deal piercing damage. Combo decks such as Reasoning Gate can push for one-turn kills and bring duels to a swift end. Anti-meta decks such as Warriors have the utility to out almost anything, and are among some of GOAT's worst matchups. Over 15 years have passed since the genesis of GOAT format, and yet it still continues to evolve even to this day. GOAT format would further grow that summer with the release of the Lost Millennium. The Lost Millennium would mark the beginning of the GX era as it introduced new archetypes such as Ancient Gears and Elemental Heroes. In terms of meta relevance, the best cards in this set were easily Brain Control, with its ability to steal your opponent's monsters, and DD Survivor, with its ability to hard counter the popular Nobleman of Crossout and DD Warrior Lady. The Lost Millennium would be the final set released before the 2005 World Championship. Releasing alongside the Lost Millennium was Tournament Pack 6. Toon Table of Contents has gone on to be played in more combo decks than actual Toon decks. This is because the card could search additional copies of itself, something the likes of Reinforcement of the Army couldn't do. The popular strategy with this was to play 3 copies in your deck alongside Toon World or a Toon Monster. Playing it essentially allowed you to remove 3 cards from your deck, something that was very useful in strategies that needed to burn through their cards quickly. GOAT Control variants would go from strength to strength throughout the format, winning multiple Shonen Jump championships, including Los Angeles, Houston, and Charlotte. The Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship would roll around once again in August. This time, however, the venue would be in Japan and not America. As always, the World Championship was split up into 2 tournaments, one for the trading card game, and another for the World Championship games on Game Boy. I just want to take a moment to appreciate the visual of all those people sat in one room, their Game Boy Advances linked together by a cable. It's the kind of thing you simply don't see anymore. Video games sure have evolved fast. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that ever again. As always, links to the full video can be found in the description. The 2005 World Championship would very much be the GOAT format tournament. There was very little difference between the TCG and OCG Forbidden Unlimited lists. This similarity in metagames may be able to explain why Westerners were much more successful this time around, as first place would be taken by Greek player Miltiades Markow. Markow would be the first non-Asian Yu-Gi-Oh! World Champion, and he would do it with a Sacred Felix GOAT control variant that would take everyone by surprise. Hand of Nephis alongside monster stealing cards like Brain Controller and Enemy Controller would help turbo out the Sacred Felix. Once the Felix was out, it'd be difficult to get rid of, allowing Markow to control the pace. This turbo strategy would further be boosted by the inclusion of Apprentice Magician, who could retrieve both Hand of Nephis and Magician of Faith from the deck. Outside of the Sacred Felix combos, the card selection was pretty typical of a GOAT control deck. Delinquent Duo, Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity would make up the trinity, while Scapegoat and Metamorphosis would be used together to bring out the Thousand Eyes Restrict. For the side deck, Markow would get hella spicy, as Elephant Statue of Disaster would burn your opponent if they discarded it from your hand. In second place we would have Mexican representative Jorge Fabian Pina Lizarraga and his Empty Jar deck. Empty Jar was a deck that aimed to do two things and two things only: deck your opponent out, and do it as quickly as humanly possible. This deck has a reputation of being something of a no-skill deck, but in 2004 you had to be good at counting your cards, otherwise you risked decking out yourself. Fast forward 1 year however, and the tables had completely turned, thanks to the release of a little thing called Serial Spell. Serial Spell would allow you to resolve the effect of a spell card twice by discarding your entire hand as cost. In the case of Empty Jar, this allowed the player to activate card destruction twice without needing to draw any additional cards from their deck. The release of Serial Spell made Empty Jar extremely consistent almost overnight. The side deck has unfortunately been lost to history, but that's fine, because it's this main deck strategy that matters. Last but not least, the bronze medal would go to David Kretschmer from Germany, making this the first Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship where an Asian player did not make the top 3. Despite taking place in Japan, the tournament's top 8 would contain only one Japanese player. Like the 2 players above him, Kretschmer would also surprise everyone with his deck choice, as he entered the tournament with a Machine Beatdown deck. The deck would contain no Metamorphosis, no Scapegoat, and no Fusion monsters, going against the grain of the GOAT format. Whereas GOAT decks focused on controlling the field, and Empty Jar focused on emptying the decks, Machine Beatdown focused on OTKing with limiter removal. Although Mechanical Chaser was the stronger machine monster, X-Head Cannon was chosen for its light attribute. The Kochi, the Battle Charge Locomotive, was also utilised thanks to its deck thinning potential and ability to be food for Blackluster Soldier. In the side deck we'd see a complete change in strategy. Kretschmer would side out his Machine Beatdown strategy, and would switch to a Stall Burn strategy including the likes of Spirit Reaper, Stealth Bird, Wave Motion Cannon, and Messenger of Peace. For the quote-unquote GOAT format World Championship, this was quite the unexpected top 3. And so came the end of the 2005 World Championship, and with it, the end of GOAT format, as Yu-Gi-Oh! Was about to be changed forever with the release of Cybernetic Revolution on August 17, 2005. Only one thing needs to be said about this set. Cyber Dragon completely flipped the game on its head. It would be the chase card, as the rest of the set was seemingly designed around it. Power Bond would allow you to fuse your Cyber Dragons into a Cyber Trin or Cyber End Dragon while doubling their attack. System Down would banish machine monsters from the field or graveyard, and Fusion Recovery would allow you to retrieve your polymerizations from the graveyard. While not the focus of the set, Elemental Heroes would also receive a nice boost in the form of Elemental Hero Bubble Man and Miracle Fusion. September 1st would also see the release of the 2005 Tim promos, the most significant of which being Exarion Universe. Its incredibly high stat spread, combined with its ability to deal piercing battle damage, would be the final nail in the coffin for Goat Control. Goat Control had one last early meta hurrah at Shonen Jump Boston, but the writing was on the wall. If the ban list didn't kill it, developments in the game eventually would have, as the meta began to move in favour of cards such as Cyber Dragon and Chaos Sorcerer. With Goat Control dead, the October 2005 Forbidden and Limited list would bury it for good, as we saw the bannings of Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning, Sinister Serpent, Tribe Infecting Virus, the Trinity, Mirror Force, and Ring of Destruction. Goat Control staples such as Tsukiyomi, Thousand Eyes Restrict, Metamorphoses, Book of Moon, Scapegoat, Magician of Faith, and Nobleman of Crossout would all go to Limited. The other two top decks from the World Championship would also see a hit, with Book of Tayo and Limiter removal going to 1. Night Assailant would be limited thanks to its ability to loop and retrieve cards with its effect, and finally Dark Hole and Confiscation would see themselves unbanned. Dark Scorpion Chick the Yellow, Vampire Lord, and Marauding Captain would come off the list altogether. It's fair to say that this was a significantly game-changing ban list, and Pot of Greed has not been seen in competitive play since. October that year would see some new structure deck releases, with Warrior's Triumph containing Divine Sword Felix Blade. This card had the effect where you could equip it to a warrior type monster to increase its attack by 300 points, and if it was in the graveyard during your main phase, you could remove 2 warrior type monsters in your graveyard from play to add it back to your hand. With the likes of Return from the Different Dimension and Dimension Fusion sitting at 3, it would not be long before we saw this utilised in combo decks. This isn't a card release, but it's worth talking about. November 4th, 2005 would see the release of Yu-Gi-Oh! Online. Yu-Gi-Oh! Online was a pay-to-play online matchmaking simulator, the first of its kind to be officially endorsed by Konami. Players would purchase USB sticks containing duel points. These duel points acted as credits for play. Each time you played a match, you would use 1 duel point, run out of duel points, and you'd have to go out to buy more if you wanted to play. It's not exactly the ideal way to play Yu-Gi-Oh!, but they had to start somewhere. 2005 would be rounded off with the release of Elemental Energy on November 16th. This set had a huge focus on supporting anime archetypes such as Elemental Heroes. Competitive cards of note in this set would be Pot of Avarice, Hydrageddon, yes, really, and the Dark World archetype. Pot of Avarice allowed you to shuffle 5 monsters from your graveyard into the deck to draw 2 new cards. As you can probably guess, it was intended as a replacement for the recently banned Pot of Greed. Hydrageddon had the battle focus effect where it summoned additional copies of itself when it destroyed an opponent's monster. Finally, Dark World was an archetype who would activate their effects when discarded to the graveyard. Low-level monsters such as Brow would have beneficial effects such as drawing additional cards, whilst higher-level monsters such as Silver would special summon themselves from the graveyard. It was certainly a change of pace and one of the first truly successful archetypes in the game. The final card of note wouldn't even be part of Elemental Energy. Exchange of the Spirit would be included as a bonus to players who took part in the Sneak Peek event. You can only activate this card by paying 1000 life points while there were 15 or more cards in your graveyard. Both players swap the cards in their graveyard with the cards in their deck. This card was immediately limited to 1 on release. The goal with this card was to fill your graveyard as much as possible before activating it. That way you would put your entire graveyard back into your deck, whilst your opponent would put their entire deck into the graveyard, giving you a guaranteed victory. Had it not been for the banning of Mercuria the Destructor, this card wouldn't have seen a release in the TCG at all, as the two together caused absolute havoc in the OCG 3 years earlier. And that's it for 2005. The modern resurgence of GOAT makes it one of the most intriguing formats in the game's history. It gives us a clue on the game's potential longevity should it ever be discontinued. It is also the only format where we can experience natural meta evolution without the outside influences of new set releases and ban lists. Close to a decade of modern play has allowed us to see radical changes in the format. Classic GOAT control has been usurped by Chaos, while combo decks have become optimized through modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Influence. It is hard to know where GOAT format will go from here, as some players consider it completely solved. Either way, GOAT format will always be around as long as there are people out there with a thirst for classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Gameplay. If you're looking for news, tournament strategies or deck lists, I recommend GOATformat.com, which is where I got the deck lists from their most recent GOAT format championships. Online GOAT format communities are in plentiful supply and easy to find, so don't hesitate to start today. Here's some replays demonstrating what typical GOAT format duels will look like. Enjoy!
All women are queens!
M'lady, m'lady.
This card is useless.
If she breathes, she's a god!
Oh my! Oh! Yo, you're gonna die! You are gonna die! I guarantee it!
Nope.
Jesus!
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 5 of a comprehensive history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. Starting 2006 off would be the first sets in the Duelist Pack side series. Duelist Pack Jaden Yuki and Duelist Pack Chaz Princeton would release simultaneously on February 8th. Duelist Pack Jaden would be tame, containing mostly elemental hero support. Chaz on the other hand had some decent cards such as Magical Mallet and Inferno Reckless Summon. Magical Mallet allowed you to mulligan your hand, but unlike Reload, you got to choose which cards were sent back to your deck. Inferno Reckless would be a niche combo piece which allowed both players to special summon multiple copies of a monster from their hand, field, or graveyards. Neither card would be top in tournaments that year, but both would see use in the years that followed. Releasing later that same month was Shadow of Infinity. This set would debut the Sacred Beast cards Hamon, Raviel, and Oriah, but it would also contain multiple cards that have gone on to see tournament tops over the years, including Demise, King of Armageddon, Hero Kid, and Treeborn Frog. 2006 would be a huge year for competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! As there were tournaments absolutely everywhere. In the United States, the Shonen Jump Championship Series would host multiple tournaments each month. These events would quickly come to set the tone for the entire year. 2006 would be the year of Chaos Control. Chaos Sorcerer and Cyber Dragon were present in almost every deck list. Cyber Dragon and Chaos Sorcerer weren't the only popular cards at this time. Monarchs had also laid their claim to the format thanks to the release of Treeborn Frog. While making up the skeleton of most decks, Chaos Control hadn't completely rooted itself in the format yet. February 2006 would see Shonen Jump Doen taken by a Chaos Monarch build, while SJC Orlando the following month would see Michael Lux take first place with a beatdown deck. The April 2006 Forbidden Unlimited list would bring about what was quite a big shake-up to the format. Dark Hole, Cyberjar, Time Seal, Last Turn, and Exchange of the Spirit would see themselves on the wrong side of Forbidden. Graceful Charity and Mirror Force would be unbanned, while DD Assailant, Mask of Darkness, Treeborn Frog, Level Limit Area B, Drop Off, Pot of Avarice, and Last Will would all find themselves moved up to Limited. Apprentice Magician, Reflect Bounder, Magician of Faith, Nobleman of Crossout, and Deck Devastation Firers would all find themselves at 2, while Abyss Soldier and Book of Tyre would go back to 3. The bannings of Cyberjar, Last Turn, and Exchange of the Spirit would remove a lot of degeneracy from the game, and see to it that first turn kill decks couldn't thrive. That said, no card would have a bigger impact on the format than the unbanning of Graceful Charity. With Graceful Charity now at 1, players would go all in on Chaos. Chaos Control would come out in full force, taking both SJC Columbus and SJC Chicago the following month. Columbus would be run by Chaos Return, a build that would serve as a blueprint for the rest of the format. Chaos Control would take Shonen Jump Chicago after reducing the number of returns from 3 to 1. Running only one copy of Return would see it feature in less duels, but it led to better deck balance, as players were less likely to have dead hands. Releasing in the middle of Chaos Control's rise was Enemy of Justice on May 17th. This set is best remembered for introducing the Destiny Hero archetype, but overall it was a great set with many cards that would come to see heavy play over the next 5 years. E-Emergency Call was a free-off staple in almost all Elemental Hero decks. Cyber Felix would see play in all kinds of decks to complement the heavy use of Cyber Dragon. Macro Cosmos would be one of the most powerful anti-graveyard floodgates in the game. Diamond Dude would find a home in many combo decks. And Icarus Attack would be one of the best pieces of Ring Beast support released for a long time. As good as Enemy of Justice was, it didn't have much bearing on the format, as Chaos Control decks would see hardly any change over the summer. National season would see the 2006 UK National Championships be run by Rain Pinkney and his Monarch-focused Chaos Control build. More astounding, however, was the result of the 2006 US National Championships, which was run by Austin Coleman, aged 11. That's right, the National Championship for the children's trading card game was run by a child. The 2006 US National Championships are a story in themselves, and you should check out this video by Mega Capital G if you want to know more about it. Despite the National Championships, Shonen Jump events would continue to take place over the summer. SJC Atlanta would be run by Sean Long's Treeborn Frog variant, while SJC Denver would see a re-emergence of more aggressive Chaos Return builds. This build in particular went all in on flooding the field with monsters, and using Return as a way to flip the game state when losing. The Canadian Nationals would see something a little bit different, as the tournament was taken by a machine build. Blowback Dragon, Cyberstein, and limiter removal would be included alongside the heavily played triple Cyber Dragon and triple Dakochi. Lastly, in the run-up to the World Championships, July would see the emergence of the Chaos Recruiter build. Play sets of Mystic Tomato and Shining Angel alongside 2 copies of Creature Swap would see to it that the player could quickly burn through their deck and set up their graveyard for Chaos Sorcerer. What is most intriguing about the Chaos Control format is how it's retrospectively changed GOAT format. Chaos decks was something of a rarity in classic GOAT format. Modern GOAT, on the other hand, not only sees heavy Chaos representation, but Chaos Control and Chaos Recruiter themselves are arguably the best decks of the format. Sure, they may be missing the likes of Cyber Dragon, but in return they still get to use Pot of Greed, so I'd say it's a pretty fair trade-off. And so it would be World Championship time once again. This year's championship would be taking place in Akihabara in Tokyo, Japan. At this point in the game's life, the World Championships had become a much more low-key affair, as the game itself was beginning to see a decline in popularity. As such, the World Championship would reflect that, taking place in a more standardised venue not so different to the ones we see today. This tournament would once again feature the Game Boy Advance World Championship games for what would be the last time. 11-year-old Austin Coleman of US Nationals fame would make an appearance at this tournament. According to Coleman's own accounts, he actually got cheated by one of his players in this tournament, as there was a lot of deck stacking going on. To the surprise of no one, this tournament would once again be dominated by Chaos Control, Chaos Recruiter, and Chaos Return decks. All 3 top spots would come to be taken by Chaos decks. The Japanese players would once again fail to defend home soil, as the tournament would be run by Dario Longo with Italy. Longo would come out swinging with a very aggressive form of Chaos, with the likes of Double Ashura Priest, Mystic Swordsman, Cyberstein, Smashing Ground, and Double Royal Decree. This was a deck clearly focused on clearing out your opponent's boards and inflicting as much damage as possible. With Return from the Different Dimension being such a popular card in 2006, Longo was going all out to counter it. The effect of Ashura Priest to attack all monsters your opponent controls once each means your opponent could no longer block game-ending attacks with Return from the Different Dimension. The deck would also be designed around the mirror match. Double Creature Swap and Double Enemy Controller would be able to turn the games on their head, as you could steal your opponent's Chaos Sorcerers, their Cybersteins, or even the fusion monsters they summoned with Cyberstein. The versatility of cards such as these means that matches could be stolen at a moment's notice. The side deck would support Longo's own Cyberstein by including multiple life point recovery cards, but it would also leave room for conversion into a Monarch build, as Longo had the option to side in Double Mobius, Treeborn Fog, and an extra enemy controller. Defensive cards such as Karibo and Robuku would be essential when your opponent was also running Cyberstein in their builds. Overall, it is no surprise that this deck would end up winning the tournament. It was designed to counter every card that was commonly used in this format. The runner-up spot would go to Hong Kong player Shun King Hang and his Dark World variant of Chaos. In a tournament that was at risk of being completely dominated by one deck type, it's nice to see something different was able to squeeze into the top 3. Dark Worlds, Thunder Dragons, Apprentice Magicians, Solemn Judgments, Deck Devastation Virus, D-Mock. These are all cards that weren't seeing a lot of play in 2006. With Confiscation being the only real hand control card in this format, Dark Worlds might have seemed like a deck out of place. Thanks to the likes of Morphing Jar, Dark World Lightning, and Card Destruction, it would be easy for Hang to dump the likes of Silver and Gold in the graveyard, allowing him to swarm the field with high-level monsters. The inclusion of Triple Thunder Dragon would also allow him to bypass the deck's issue of needing light monsters for Chaos Sorcerer. Overall, this is a really clever build, ahead of its time even. People may have underestimated just how good Deck Devastation Virus and Solemn Judgment were at locking down games. In third place we would have a Chaos Recruiter build, courtesy of Polish player Adrian Madajc. The deck is a fairly good representation of how Chaos Recruiter works. Triple Chaos Sorcerer, triple Cyber Dragon, triple Tomato, triple Shining Angel, triple Reaper, it's all fairly standard. What isn't standard, however, is the inclusion of one Otohime. I can only assume he was running this because it's a light attribute, but also because Tsukiyomi was limited to 1. Either way, this obscure monster inclusion seemed to work out just fine. In the side deck, we can see what was basically a conversion kit for Burn. If I was to take a guess, it's likely that Chaos Sorcerer, Cyber Dragon, Royal Decree, DD Warrior Lady, Breaker, and Cyberstein would be the cards taken out. Without seeing a match report of some kind, there's no way to really know this information, but it's fun to speculate. With the World Championships over and done with, it was now time to once again begin a new series of booster packs. Releasing August 16th, 2006, Power of the Duelist would be the set which would introduce Elemental Hero Neos and the Neo-Spacians. At the time, Power of the Duelist would be a massive boon to one-turn kill decks as the Future Fusion Overload Fusion combo allowed players to end games quickly. Other than those two cards, however, Power of the Duelist would best be described as a set which had its biggest impacts in the years that would come. While all for on release, Neo-Spacian Aquadolphin and Neo-Spacian Dark Panther would eventually see competitive play, just not in the ways people expected. The same rule would apply to Baby Ceresaurus also, which is a bigger staple for dinosaur decks now than it was back then. September would feature the traditional Post-Worlds ban list update, and the end of Chaos Control. Chaos Sorcerer, Tsukiyomi, Snatch Steal, and the Thousand Eyes Restrict would all be forbidden. Magician of Faith and Nobleman of Crossout would find themselves both back in Limited, while Spirit Reaper, Future Fusion, and Gravity Bind were also added. Ring of Destruction was moved out of Forbidden, and Ultimate Offering was put to 1 in preparation for the upcoming release of the Gadget Monsters. Semi-Limited would see movements to 2 for Exiled Force, Giant Trunade, Wall of Revealing Light, and Reckless Greed. Coming off the list altogether would be Reflect Bounder, Drop Off, Lightning Vortex, and Emergency Provisions. The banning of Chaos Sorcerer would have an obvious immediate impact on the metagame, and begin what is known by some as the 1-for-1 format. The format was known as such due to how almost every interaction would leave players 1 card better or worse off in card advantage. It would be a format lacking in crazy turnaround plays and comebacks. Resource management and honest card advantage would be the name of the game. We can see this in the deck lists for Shonen Jump Boston, as Sarborg, the Thunder Monarch, became the main boss monster in Chaos Sorcerer's absence. Sarborg's ability to pop 1 card on summon made it the closest thing we still had to Chaos Sorcerer. 2 years on from the first Forbidden list, it's intriguing to see just how much the power level has been pulled back. With the exception of Cyberstein, this is probably one of the slowest and fairest formats you're likely to see, and I'm surprised more people don't play it. Unfortunately, the format wouldn't be speeding up anytime soon either. Releasing on November 15th, 2006, Cyberdark Impact was considered to be one of the worst booster sets ever made. At the time, many criticised this set for not bringing anything particularly impactful to the game. With the power of hindsight, we can see that Cyberdark Impact was maybe just too anti-meta for its own good. The likes of Vanity's Fiend, the Barrier Statues, and Blackhorn of Heaven would only serve to push interactivity out of games, as players found themselves locked out of using their cards. Chain Strike and Accumulated Fortune would only help promote the likes of Burn and Exodia decks, 2 of the most controversial and disliked decks in the game. Instant Fusion would be a bright spark among the cards in this set, but it was still way ahead of its time. In 2006, there was simply no reason to use it. With Thousand Eyes Restrict having just been banned, the card wasn't seeing play anytime soon. Speaking of bannings, 2006 would see the year close off with the surprise emergency banning of Cyberstein. No matter how you slice it, being able to pay 5,000 life points to summon any fusion monster was just way too powerful an effect for 2006. With the existence of fusion monsters such as Cyber End Dragon, Cyber Trin Dragon, and Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, being able to perform one-turn kills became way too easy. It was frankly degenerate, and did little to promote healthy play. Not only was it a sacky card, but its dark attribute, level and low stats made it far too easy to turbo out. For the sake of the game, it had to go. Cyberstein, good riddance. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of A Comprehensive History of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. Starting the year would be the release of a trio of cards people thought we'd never get. Yellow Gadget, Red Gadget and Green Gadget. These cards were released as part of the Machine Refault structure deck, a structure deck that was actually designed around Ancient Gears. Ancient Gears themselves weren't a bad archetype, but the gadgets were a step above any other machine out there. Their ability to gain card advantage by adding a gadget to your hand every time you summoned one of them made them an absolute beast when combined with Ultimate Offering. While machines wouldn't be the top deck of the format, their availability as a structure made them very popular. The year was already off to an excellent start in terms of card releases, but Konami just had to go one step further, with the release of Crush Card Virus as a Shonen Jump Championship prize card. Tribute one Dark Monster with 1000 or less attack, check all monsters on your opponent's side of the field, your opponent's hand, and all cards they draw until the end of your opponent's third turn after this card's activation, and destroy all monsters with 1500 or more attack. Dread it, month on it, it was only a matter of time before this card hit the game. While not quite on the level of Crush Card, Magical Stone Excavation would release not long after in Champion Pack Game 2. Discard 2 cards, add 1 spell card from your graveyard to your hand. That might sound like a fairly average effect, but this card would see play very quickly in a devastating combo deck. Speaking of combo decks, the release of Duelist Pack Jaden Yuki 2 and Duelist Pack Asta Felix would go a long way to pushing the combo meta. Burial from a Different Dimension, Destiny Hero Malicious, Card Trooper, and Destiny Draw would all play parts in providing engines for their respective decks. Burial, with its ability to return 3 of your removed from play monsters back to the graveyard, meant you could continue to use their grave effects. Something that would be very handy in decks that relied on the graveyard, such as zombies. Destiny Hero Malicious alongside Destiny Draw would help push the Destiny Hero engine, one of the fastest deck engines of its time. Finally, Card Trooper would become the basis of a brand new machine deck. Allow me to introduce you to Troop, Dupe, Scoop. Here's how this deck works. First, you summon Card Trooper. Card Trooper is a level 3 Earth attribute machine monster with 400 attack and 400 defense, and its effect reads, once per turn, you can send up to 3 cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard. This card gains 500 attack for each card sent to the graveyard this way until the end of the turn. When this card on your side of the field is destroyed and sent to your graveyard, draw 1 card. So this card did 3 things. It set up your graveyard for combos, it became a 1900 attack beat stick, and it floated into a draw on destruction. So far so good. But that's not all there was to Card Trooper. With its low attack, it was a fireable target for Machine Duplication. Select 1 machine type monster with 500 or less attack on your side of the field. You can special summon up to 2 additional copies of that card from your deck. That's a pretty good payoff, but we can go one step further. Activating limiter removal would turn your Card Troopers into 3800 attack beat sticks, leading to a grand total of 11,400 points of damage. Should your Card Troopers somehow fail to win that turn, you still get to draw 3 cards when they're destroyed by the effective limiter removal. Overall, the damage output and card advantage was just too good. If you were unlucky enough to be on the receiving end of this combo with no way to stop it, all you could really do was simply scoop. So with its insane card advantage and OTK ability, you'd think Troop Dupe Scoop would be the deck to beat that format, right? Well, not quite. February would also see a new subscription bonus for the US edition of Shonen Jump. Elemental Hero Stratos is a wind attribute level 4 warrior monster, and when this card is normal or special summoned, you can select and activate one of 2 effects. Destroy spell or trap cards on the field up to the number of hero monsters you control. Alternatively, select and add 1 hero monster from your deck to your hand. the card would be legal for Shonen Jump St. Louis on February 24th. I could show you the results of this tournament, but instead, here's a replay of myself and a friend playing Airblade Turbo vs Troop Dupe Scoop. Enjoy. Whew, wasn't that something? As you can see, Airblade Turbo was easily the best deck of the format, tier 0 even. It makes one wonder how the game was going to cope from here. Thankfully we didn't have to run long, as just a week later we would see the release of the March 2007 Forbidden Unlimited list. The impact of Airblade Turbo on the ban list would be immediate. Graceful Charity would be forbidden, while Giant Trunade, Dimension Fusion, and Elemental Hero Stratos would all be put to 1. These changes completely killed some of the deck's combos and forced players to slow down. Other changes to the list would include the bannings of Magician of Faith, Breaker the Magical Warrior, and Last Will. Victory Dragon would also be forbidden, not because it was strong, but because it was a ruling's nightmare. Victory Dragon had the effect where, if it was to attack your opponent directly and reduce their life points to 0, you would win the match. Not the duel, the match. That's right, Victory Dragon would win you the entire best of 3. There's just one problem. Your opponent can just forfeit at any time. So if you're in a position where you can attack directly with Victory Dragon to win the match, your opponent can just scoop it up and say we're going to game 2. As you can imagine, this caused a lot of rulings disputes. The Victory Dragon player would feel entitled to the match, while the other player would argue that they had the right to forfeit and move on to the next game. In the end, it was just better to ban it. In Limited, we would see Snatch Steel taken off the naughty step, while Neo-Spacian Grandmaw was also put to 1 for its ability to out just about any monster in the game. Chain Strike was put to 1 when it became apparent that this card could easily take over 2,000 life points off your opponent in one go. Overload Fusion was put to 1 for many of the same reasons as Dimension Fusion, namely OTKs. Mind Crush was put to 1 thanks to its old ruling where you were allowed to look at your opponent's hand with it. And Crush Card was put to Limited because of course it was. It was simply too new to ban, especially as it didn't have wide distribution yet. DD Assailant would go the semi-limited thanks to its utility as a removal card. Mask of Darkness would be joining it as it was basically a weaker version of the already powerful Magician of Faith. With the meta having moved away from fusion monsters, Metamorphosis would be allowed to go from 1 to 2. Finally, we would see Injection Fairy Lily, Sacred Felix of Nephis, Exiled Force, and Upstock Goblin come off the list altogether, as they had simply fallen out of favour. With OTK strategies being neutered, it was now time for a new meta, and there was no better place to start than with the release of Strike of Neos on February 28, 2007. Strike of Neos would see archetype support with the release of new Dark World monsters and the debut of the 6 Samurai. For its time, this was an absolutely crazy good set. So good that there's just too many cards for this one page. The previously mentioned Bramble makes an appearance here, and it was apparent on release that this card couldn't be allowed at free. Great Shogun Shien would take lead as the boss monster of the 6 Samurai, thanks to its ability to lock your opponent to only 1 back row return. Combine this with the archetype's ability to have your monsters substitute themselves for another's destruction, and you had a very hard to get rid of card. Although designed to support for its archetype, Dark World Dealing's ability to draw 1 card and then discard 1 card would see it get used in all sorts of decks. Ancient Rules was Konami's cute little method to get people to cheat out their Blue Eyes White Dragons and Dark Magicians, 2 cards which at this point were still popular, but pretty unplayable in a duel. Strike of Neos would see no shortage of side deck cards either. Pulling the Rug would be a popular counter to the Tribute Summoned focused Monarch decks. The effect of the Transmigration Prophecy to return cards from the graveyard to the deck would see some niche use over the years. And finally, DD Crow remains one of the best hand traps in the game, thanks to its ability to banish 1 card from your opponent's graveyard. That effect may sound a little bit simple, but as we've learnt time and time again, some of the best abilities in the game are the simple ones. Moving into March, we would see the release of Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship 2007 for the Nintendo DS. This game would be the first in its series to release on a system other than the Game Boy Advance. More significant, however, was the promo cards that came with it. Spell Striker allowed you to special summon it from your hand by banishing 1 spell card from your graveyard. But better yet was Destiny Hero Disc Commander, who allowed you to draw 2 cards when it was special summoned from the graveyard. Considering Destiny Heroes were already one of the strongest draw engines in the game, the release of Disc Commander was just too good to be true. On May 16th, we would see the release of what would be the last mainline set before the World Championships in July. Force of the Breaker wouldn't quite be on the level of Strike of Neos, but still had plenty to bring to the game. Rise of the Storm Monarch would be a huge boost to what was already a powerful deck in the format. Force of the Breaker would see the introduction of field-searching monsters such as Gravekeeper's Commandant and Harpy Queen, 2 cards that would search Necrophaly and Harpy's Hunting Ground respectively. A common theme in 2007 seemed to be the effectiveness of monsters that you could use from your hand. This theme would continue with the release of the Volcanics archetype. This unique archetype would bring a completely new style of play to Yu-Gi-Oh! Your main strategy wasn't so much to attack your opponent with your monsters on the field, but to use those monsters as ammunition for your Blaze Accelerator spell and trap cards. These card combinations would see the deck act as an artillery strike of sorts, as it blew up everything your opponent had until there was nothing left. Not to be completely overshadowed by the Volcanics was the release of the Crystal Beast monsters as well. Like Volcanics, this archetype would also have a unique style of play, as monsters who are destroyed would go to the spell and trap zone instead of the graveyard. While not as competitively solid as the other archetypes from this time, Crystal Beast would still go on to have a huge fan following. The final cards I want to talk about are Field Barrier, a card that will be very familiar to anyone who's played a Mystic Mind deck in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Eradicator Epidemic Virus. Tribute 1 Dark Monster with 2000 or more attack, and choose spell cards or trap cards. Check all spell and trap cards on your opponent's side of the field, in your opponent's hand, and all cards your opponent draws until the end of the 3rd turn after this card's activation. Destroy all cards of the chosen type. While not as devastating or easily abusable as Crush Card, EEV was still a force to be reckoned with should it be used on you. Now that we have all the pre-world set releases out the way, let's take a look at how the metagame was doing as the Shonen Jump Championships were in full swing. 2007 would be the year of the Monarchs. Festalos, the Firestorm Monarch, Riser, the Storm Monarch, Sarborg, the Thunder Monarch, and Mobius, the Frost Monarch. These 4 monsters would be a common sight throughout the year. Sorry Grandmog, you're just not quite good enough. The run-up to Worlds would see Monarchs go on an absolute tear, as they were among some of the most represented decks in the meta. In April we would see Cesar Gonzalez take Shonen Jump Montreal with what was a very aggressive Monarch build. Playsets of Cyber Dragon, Bikuchi, Gravekeeper's Spy, and Brain Control would give Gonzalez all the resources he needed to play his 8 main deck Monarchs. With Monarchs having gained a reputation as a control deck, seeing such an aggressive variant must have caught a lot of people off guard. Monarchs would continue the top, as Jesse Samek took Shonen Jump Philadelphia with his Destiny Hero Monarch hybrid deck. With this deck, it's like Samek took the entire metagame and just combined it into one package. First place decks are all well and good, but they don't always tell the full story of the metagame. In the case of Monarchs, however, they were the real deal, taking 7 out of the top 8 spots at Philadelphia. Despite the dominance of Monarch decks, we would still see some resistance throughout the year. June would see Shonen Jump Minneapolis taken by Sean Scurry's Destiny Hero Beatdown build. Devoid of Monarchs, this build would see a return of the out of favour Dark Magician of Chaos, Jinzo, and Metamorphosis. Add 1 copy of the elusive Crush Card Virus to the mix, and you had a deck designed to halt the rampage of the Monarchs. Monarchs would strike back, however, as Adam Korn took the US Nationals with his Trooper Monarch build. As a side note to the US Nationals, I just want to quickly talk about what is one of the coolest decks I've ever seen. This is Aggro Burn, made by Justin Romack. Instead of opting for Aggro or Stall Burn, which was common at the time, Romack chose both, going for a deck which aimed to end games as quickly as possible. Romack was able to get away with this thanks in part to a metagame where players were firing card advantage over life points. Adding to the deck's utility was the side, which allowed Romack to modify it into a Monarch build. This deck would heavily confuse opponents, and it was difficult to side for. Romack's efforts would ultimately pay off as a top 4 finish saw him qualify for Worlds. If you want to know more about this cool deck, go see Mega Capital G's video on it. Before we get to the World Championships, I just want to make a little side note about the Shonen Jump bonus card, Green Baboon, Defender of the Forest. When a beast monster you control is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can pay 1000 life points to special summon this card from your hand or graveyard. On paper, this was a half decent self-recycling beat stick, but in reality, it would become the basis for an infamous deck known as Baboon Burn. July 28th would see the 2007 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship take place in San Diego. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get any official Konami documentary footage to leech off, so instead, here's a video of the finals.
He's trying to figure out game. Scores 3,700 for Mattia.
Much like the Shonen Jump Championship events before it, the 2007 World Championships was a Monarch format. The tournament would be run by Chilean Monarch player Andreas Toro. Andreas would run triple Riser and triple Festalodes to give him full control of the field and hand. Cyber Dragon, Gravekeeper's Spy, and Treeborn Frog would be coming in once again as the tribute fodder, while Card Trooper and Dekochi would burn through the deck. Brain Control, Snatch Steal, and Soul Exchange gave extra control of the opponent's field. The side deck would see double Mobius utilised for back row removal, as well as triple Hydrogeddon for aggressive field swarming. The side would also see a cameo by Banisher of the Radiance, who was used to punish players who ran Card Trooper and Treeborn Frog. Finally, we would see Pulling the Rug sided for the mirror match. Overall, the level of control this deck had over the game was outrageous, as Andreas had access to cards on both sides of the field. Italy's Mattia Sarpa would be taking second with his Machine Monarch hybrid. This was a far more aggressive variant of Monarchs, as Sarpa was looking to swarm the field with Hydrogeddons and Card Troopers as quickly as possible. Cyber Felix would play a key role in protecting the Card Troopers, Cyber Dragons and Jinzo. Unique to this deck from the builds we've seen so far is the inclusion of Triple Trap Dust Shoot in the main deck. This card is normally seen in the side or with the occasional main deck cameo, but up 3 was almost unheard of. In the side we would see a conversion kit for a burn deck, as likes of Snipe Hunter, Descarala and Wave Motion Cannon help push that strategy. System Down was played to counter other machine decks, and we would see Trista and Dust Tornado used over the likes of Mobius for back row removal. Pulling the Rug would once again make an appearance as a Monarch counter, and Snipe Hunter was a nice tech inclusion for outing problem cards. Third place would see an appearance by US National Champion Adam Korn, who would be running an anti-meta Stolburn deck. It'd be a defensive deck designed to lock down the likes of Monarchs and Card Trooper with cards such as Gravekeeper's Spy, Spirit Reaper, Messenger of Peace, Level Limit Area A, Swords of Revealing Light, Solemn Judgment, Pulling the Rug, and Magic Cylinder all in the main deck. 2 copies of Mask of Darkness would see these traps recycled regularly. Wave Motion Cannon would top it all off by acting as baits for the opponent's back row removal cards. In a matchup against this deck, you'd be forced to make a choice. Do you get rid of the Wave Motion Cannon now? Or do you attempt to go after the other back row cards and hope to end the game quickly? In the side, we'd see the reverse of Sarpa's strategy as Korn converted his deck into a Monarch build. Compared to previous World Championship decks, this was very intuitive anti-meta deck building. Real impressive stuff. The World Championships were over and it was once again time for a new season of cards. Releasing on August 15th, 2007, Tactical Evolution would be just that, as it contained many cards that would come to shape present and future metas. Zombie Master and Illblood would be immediate staples in zombie decks, while Elemental Hero Neos Alias and Hero Counterattack would be deceptively good additions to the archetype. Necro Gardener would be one to watch in the future thanks to its attack negation effect, and Double Summon was a gadget player's dream. It was a set with much potential also, thanks to the likes of Broken Bamboo Sword, Snake Rain, and Summoner's Art. We can't go on without mentioning Rainbow Dragon either. August would also see the introduction of a new Shonen Jump prize card. Crush Card Virus was out, Gold Sarcophagus was in. While not as broken as Crush Card, Gold Sarcophagus was still extremely powerful thanks to its ability to search any card from your deck. Also appearing in August was the Comic Con pre-release of Premium Pack, containing the ever-annoying Marshmallow. The September 2007 Forbidden Unlimited list would see the unsurprising but rather large shake-up to the metagame. Metamorphosis and Confiscation would be banned for good, while also being joined in Forbidden by Ring of Destruction and Snatch Steal. Limited would see the return of Breaker the Magical Warrior and the Magician of Faith, while Card Trooper, Destiny Hero Disc Commander, Marshmallow, Snipe Hunter, Brain Control, Fishshore, Gold Sarcophagus, Megamorph, Smashing Ground, the Transmigration Prophecy, Trap Dust Shoot, and War of Revealing Light would all go to 1. Semi-limited would see Slap on the Wrists for the Gadgets, Destiny Hero Malicious, Royal Decree and Pot of Avarice, whilst Jinzo and Nobleman of Crossout moved out of limited. Unlimited would see DD Assailant, Protector of the Sanctuary, Good Goblin Housekeeping, and Deck Devastation Fire was let off the list altogether. There would not be another main set pack release until November, but that didn't stop Konami giving players plenty of new cards to look forward to. September would see the trap card Dark Bribe included in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Tag Force 2. This counter card allowed you to negate any spell or trap at the trade-off of giving your opponent an extra draw. In October we would see the release of the Rise of the Dragon Lord structure deck. The deck itself wouldn't make any major waves, but it did include the likes of Malevolent Catastrophe, Trade-In, and the ever so powerful Foolish Burial. November would see the TCG introduction of one of the most important boss monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, as players were finally able to get their hands on Light and Darkness Dragon. Light and Darkness Dragon, or LADD, is a level 8 dragon monster with 2800 attack and 2400 defense, and an effect that reads, "This card cannot be special summoned. While this card is face up on the field, its attribute is also treated as dark. When a spell or trap card is activated, or the effect of an effect monster is activated, that activation is negated, and this card loses 500 attack and defense. When this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, select one monster in your graveyard, then destroy all cards you control, special summon that monster." This card was good, damn good, an on-field Omni-Negate that could be activated multiple times per turn. By 2007 standards, that was an incredible card effect. The option to special summon a monster from your graveyard and attempt a comeback play was just icing on the cake. To the surprise of no one, Light and Darkness Dragon would see competitive play immediately, as it was perfectly suited to the Tribute Summon heavy Monarch meta. November would see the year's pack releases end on a high, as Gladiator's Assault would bring many new powerful cards to the game. The newly released Gladiator Beast archetype would soon be a huge deal, as the likes of Bestiari, Heliclinos, and Test-Tiger would become common sights at tournaments. 6 Samurais would also receive additional support and become an incredibly solid deck, thanks to the inclusion of cards such as Enshi, Shen's Chancellor, with its ability to special summon itself and pop monsters on the field. The likes of Necroface, Soul Taker, Dragon Ice, and the Imprisoning Mirrors would be among the set's many useful technical cards. Gladiator's Assault would also be fondly remembered for its Rainbow Dragon Chaos Neos Ghost Rare misprint, a card which has become something of a favourite among collectors. Set releases might have been over for the year, but card releases weren't, as we saw the double whammy of World Championship 2008 and Tag Force Evolution for Nintendo DS and PlayStation 2 respectively. Included in World Championship was Dimensional Prison, a card which straight up power crept Sakuretsu armor, as it removed monsters from play instead of destroying them. Tag Force Evolution would include the monster Nurse Refugule, the Fallen One, whose effect would turn recovery damage into burn damage, something which would later form the basis of the powerful Nurse Burn deck. These cards would come a little too late for the 2007 metagame. The staggered international release didn't help either. Regardless, the show had to go on as we moved into a new season of the Shonen Jump Championships. September would see Shonen Jump Washington be taken by Jonathan LaBounty, with the new Monarch variant known as Perfect Circle. The name Perfect Circle referred to how the build would constantly loop cards back to the top of the opponent's deck using the effects of Rise of the Storm Monarch and Felix Ringed Wind Blast. Add a little bit of Crush card to the equation, and you had a deck that was impossible to fight back against once it got going. Fortunately for many, this side of the year would not see the same level of Monarch dominance as we had seen before the World Championships. October would see Philip Anthony's zombie build take Shonen Jump Durham. The introduction of Zombie Master and Allblood would be the key needed to finally unlock the full potential of Card of Safe Return. Zombie decks already utilised a strategy which revolved around reviving monsters from the graveyard. Zombie Master just put it on the next level. With 3 copies of Safe Return, you had a deck whose draw power was simply unmatched at the time. Continuing this trend of Monarchs not winning thing was Louis Raimondo's Burn deck from Shonen Jump Chicago. This deck would take the burn strategy in a new direction, as the inclusion of double Dark Bribe and triple skill drain would essentially stop your opponent from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Once the opponent had sided for the deck's 18 trap cards, it was time to bring out the Monarch strategy. It would appear that smoke screening was a very popular tactic back then. For those of you unfamiliar with that term, smoke screening is the act of combining your side deck and main deck together and then taking out the 15 cards you don't want to use. That way, your opponent has no reference to what it is you're actually siding. You could be siding counter cards, you could be siding an entire new strategy, or you could just be playing mind games with them and siding nothing at all. One thing's for sure, it worked a treat in Chicago. 2007 would close off with a return to form, as the Monarchs would strike back with a new variation simply known as Circle. This 45 card beast would be made to heavily support Light and Darkness Dragon, as the deck's pirate would aim to get it on the field as quickly as possible. The inclusion of the Destiny Hero engine alongside the newly released Foolish Burial made this one hell of a fast deck. Considering Monarch's reputation as a control deck, the speed of this thing must have took a lot of people by surprise. So that's it for 2007, a crazy year which saw the game take huge strides away from the chaos strategies that had dominated in the past. Monarch decks may have controlled the meta a little too much, but considering what Airblade Turbo was capable of, things could have been much worse. Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of A Comprehensive History of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. If you thought 2007's Monarch dominated formats were a bit slow, then get ready because things were about to explode big time. Starting 2008 off, we'd see the release of Duelist Pack Jesse Anderson and Duelist Pack Jaden Yuki 3. These sets wouldn't have an immediate impact on the meta, but cards such as Phantom Skyblaster and Grinder Golem would see mass use years later as they became impactful cards in the early Link era. The Duelist packs were nice as always, but the real impacts on the game could be found in the main sets. Phantom Darkness was no exception. Ooh boy, this was a big one. Released on February 13th, 2008, this set is the GX what Invasion of Chaos was to the Duel Monsters era. With an absolute wealth of powerful dark monsters, this set increased the price of playing the game exponentially. It's not often that a set can come along and just double or even triple the playing costs of competitive decks, but this set certainly managed it, and it's no surprise when you consider that many of these cards still see competitive play today. Cards such as Lonefire Blossom and Gigaplant would be two of the most important plant monsters ever made, while Dark Grepher and Armageddon Knight would be two of the best dark monster tutors in the entire game, being able to send pretty much any dark monster you wanted from your deck to the graveyard. Super Polymerization was a nigh-on unstoppable quick play spell card that allowed you to use your opponent's monsters for your own fusions. With the card's effect barring your opponent from responding to its activation, players would go on to coin the term Spell Speed 4 when talking about it. 6 Samurai United would be a massive boost to the deck and take it to new competitive heights. Allure with Darkness would quickly become one of, if not the best draw card in the game, as it allowed you to add the cards to your hand before paying cost. Watch out though, if you didn't have a dark monster on hand to banish, then you would lose your entire hand. Shadow Priestess of Ohm would be the final piece of a very notorious FTK deck. Goblin Zombie would be a big boost for who else but zombie decks. And finally, Darius would be a very welcome addition to Gladiator Beast decks. All of these cards were very good, and Phantom Darkness was already an excellent pack off of them alone. However, there was one monster that would take it to the next level. Invasion of Chaos had the Chaos monsters. Phantom Darkness would have Dark Arm Dragon. Dark Arm Dragon is a level 7 Dark Dragon monster with 2800 attack and 1000 defense, and an effect that reads, this card cannot be normal summoned or set. This card cannot be special summoned except by having exactly 3 dark monsters in your graveyard. You can remove on play 1 dark monster from your graveyard to destroy 1 card on the field. At first glance that summon condition might seem a bit situational, but in truth it wasn't that difficult to have exactly 3 dark monsters in your graveyard. Cards such as Dark Grepher, Armageddon Knight, and Destiny Hero Malicious made it more than possible to manipulate your graveyard to have the correct number. With the right setup, the summon was practically guaranteed. Once on field, it could easily clear the board, as its destruction effect was not once per turn. As long as you had dark monsters in your graveyard, you could destroy your opponent's cards. Thanks to its special summon, destruction utility, and ability to set up your remove from play pile ready for return from a different dimension or dimension fusion, this card facilitated very easy OTKs. Putting all these positives together, this card was extremely powerful and therefore notoriously expensive. To this day, you can still find legends on the internet about how much this card actually costs back in the day. Depending on where you looked, the card's price was anywhere between $200 and $500. That's not for the playset, that's not for the deck, that's just for the one copy of the card. It was that strong. If you're wondering why it's only now such cards were becoming so expensive, it's to do with how card distribution was handled in GX era packs. When Konami finally reintroduced secret rares, they made it so each set had multiple secret rares, as opposed to just 2. As such, this meant certain secret rares were practically short printed, making them even harder to get than normal. If you go back and look at any secret rare from this era, you'll find that today they have incredibly high asking prices. Dark Arm Dragon's presence would be immediately felt on the game, but it wouldn't come to prominence as the best deck just yet, as in February 2008 we would see Shonen Jump Houston be run by Jonathan Moore's 6 Samurai deck. The introduction of 6 Samurai United would give the deck the draw power it needed to combat the emerging Dark Arm Dragon decks. Furthermore, Great Shogun Shien's lockdown effect to make it so your opponent can only activate one spell or trap per turn made it difficult for Dark Arm Dragon decks to fully get going. For Jonathan Moore, it was simply the right place at the right time. Had this deck list come along later, it wouldn't have done nearly as well. Adam Korn would place second with his Dark Arm Dragon build. Compared to later Dark Arm Dragon builds, it was primitive, but we all had to start somewhere. The likes of Strike Ninja, Mystic Tomato, and DD Scalplane would very quickly fall out of favour. Adam Korn did have the elusive Crush Card virus, but on the day it just wasn't enough to take first place. The March 2008 Forbidden Limited list would make a lot of changes to the game, but in hindsight maybe they should have held off on some of them. Breaker the Magical Warrior, Magician of Faith, and Call the Haunted would all be forbidden, while in Limited and Semi-Limited we would see hits to the Perfect Circle decks, as Rise of the Storm Monarch went to 1, and Light and Darkness Dragon went to 2. Now here's the thing about Perfect Circle. It was, keyword being was, the strongest deck. But as soon as the Phantom Darkness hit, everyone started moving on to combo decks. Had Konami left the Perfect Circle deck alone, there's no guarantee it would have been able to compete with the emerging combo decks. Anyhow, we'd also see Nobleman of Crossout go to Limited alongside Monster Reborn, Advanced Ritual Art, and Ojama Trio. We would see Foolish Burial, Book of Moon, Necroface, Cyber Dragon, Magical Spell Excavation, and Mage Power go to 2. At 3, we would see the Gadgets, Jinzo, Reckless Greed, Pot of Avarice, Creature Swap, and Apprentice Magician all be unlimited. With the ban list hitting Monarchs alongside rogue decks such as Burn and Demise OTK, the field was left wide open for Dark Arm Dragon decks to take charge of the meta. And we would see this happen in March, as Dark Arm Dragon decks would completely storm the top spots at Shonen Jump Columbus and Shonen Jump Costa Mesa. The most notable build from this period was Jerry Wang's Dark Arm Return from Shonen Jump Columbus. This build was an amalgamation of every Dark engine out there. The amount of card advantage generated by this deck was outrageous for 2008. It was an easy deck to burn through, it was an easy graveyard to set up for Dark Arm Dragon, and most importantly, it was easy to set up the Banish pile so you could OTK with Return or Dimension Fusion. Add the huge pool of monsters who could be tributed for Crush Card virus, and you had what was at the time one of the strongest tier 1 decks ever made. This might not have been Chaos Yatta levels of OP, but it was certainly up there, definitely bordering that line between tier 1 and tier 0. Moving on from Dark Arm Dragon for a bit, we had some card releases. In March we would see the release of the Shonen Jump prize card, Doom Caliber Knight, and the Duelist Pack Jaden Yuki Tim promo, Elemental Hero Prisma. Doom Caliber Knight had an effect where it would automatically tribute itself to negate any monster effect that activated on the field, making it a very good anti-meta card. Meanwhile, Elemental Hero Prisma had the effect where it could send any monster from your deck to your graveyard, assuming that monster is listed as a material on a fusion card. In April, we would see the release of the Dark Emperor structure deck, a rarity at the time being that it was a structure deck that was actually very, very good. 2 new significant cards would be introduced in the structure: Caius the Shadow Monarch and DDR Dance in a different dimension reincarnation. Caius, like all monarchs, gained its effect when tribute summoned, allowing it to banish any card on the field. Then, if that card was a dark monster, your opponent took 1000 points of burn damage. A popular tactic with Caius was to have the card banish itself to burn the opponent for game. Different dimension reincarnation functions somewhat like premature burial. Discard 1 card, select one of your removed from play monsters, special summon it in attack position and equip it with this card. When this card is removed from the field, destroy the equipped monster. So not only was this card able to retrieve your banished monsters, but they got sent to the graveyard when they were destroyed instead of being banished again. The Dark Emperor structure deck was a great release on its own, but it was only an appetizer for what was to come. April 2008 would finally see a mass printing of the all-powerful Crush Card virus, as it appeared as a reprint in Gold Series. The reprinting, however, would do little to address the card's scarcity, as people were still having to pay hundreds of dollars for copies of it. With all this release for Dark support, you'd think the already dominant Dark Arm Dragon decks would just go on to win everything, but there were a few twists in the narrative. That same month would see Shonen Jump Minneapolis be run by Paul Leviton's Gladiator Beast deck. This was clearly a very control-orientated build, designed to counter the Dark Arm Dragon decks that had risen up in the meta. The monster selection itself was fairly standard, being assisted by techs such as Rescue Cat and Neospatian Grandmaul. Grandmaul in particular was a good pick for the format, allowing you to bounce back any of the boss monsters that were being played at the time. At first place, it paid off handsomely. Dark Arm Dragon decks would continue to be a problem in the format, but we wouldn't have to wait long for something to be done about them. In May 2008, Upper Deck Entertainment took matters into their own hand and released the emergency ban list. Dimension fusion was forbidden, return from the different dimension was limited, and a Lure of Darkness was semi-limited. These emergency changes to the format were made to help address what was an unhealthy game balance, as Dark Arm Dragon was taking almost all the top spots at offense. With Dark Arm Dragon weakened and Gladiator Beast on the rise, we would come to see the emergence of a 2-deck format, as Gladiator Beast and Dark Arm Dragon decks would take the majority of top spots over the months that followed. I mean, just look at the level of representation here. It just keeps going. So many Gladiator Beasts, so many dads. We would still see new set releases throughout all of this. In May we would see the release of Light of Destruction, the last set of the GX era. It would attempt to end GX off on a high note, as it introduced many more powerful cards into the game. Not quite on the level of Phantom Darkness, but still a good effort. Light Swarms is an archetype that would go on to be one of the most successful and long-lasting in the game's history, thanks to its focus on milling cards from the deck to graveyard to gain monster effects. Outside of the Lightsworn engine, you had strong anti-meta cards such as Summon Limit, Fog King, Fossil Diner, and Volcanic Queen. You also had strong archetypal support, the likes of Substitute for Fogs, Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem for who else but Ancient Gears, Arcana Force, a bad archetype, but ooh boy was this card a doozy. Call the coin flip right and your opponent had to skip their turn. Most important from this set at the time were the release of 2 individual cards, Honest and Gladiator Beast Gazaris. Honest had the effect where, during your main phase, you can return this card from the field to its owner's hand. During either player's damage step, when a face-up light monster you control battles, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to have that monster gain attack equal to the attack of the opponent's monster it is battling, until the end phase. In short, Honest gave your light monsters the ability to run over any other monster in the game. In the Light Swarm matchup, this resulted in a game state where attacking into anything was extremely risky. Gladiator Beast Gasaurus was the second fusion monster released for the Gladiator Beast archetype. To create it, you performed a contact fusion between Gladiator Beast Bestiari and one other Gladiator Beast monster. This card can only be special summoned from your fusion deck by returning the above card you control to the deck. You do not use polymerization. When this card is special summoned, you can destroy up to 2 cards on the field. At the end of the battle phase, if this card attacked or was attacked, you can return this card to the fusion deck to special summon 2 Gladiator Beast monsters from your deck, except Gladiator Beast Bestiari. You see, the problem with Heraclinos was, while it was really powerful and had a negation effect, you needed 3 monsters to summon it. Gasaurus only needed 2, making it much easier to get out. On top of that, the ability to destroy 2 cards on the field was a massive bonus for all that effort. It was just a really good card overall, and that extra push the deck needed to go on the run it did over that summer. Before moving on from Light of Destruction, let's have a shout out for everyone's favourite asshole boss monster card, Judgment Dragon. This level 8 light dragon monster had 3000 attack and 2600 defense, and an effect that reads, this card cannot be normal summoned or set. This card cannot be special summoned except by having 4 or more Light Swarm monsters with different names in your graveyard. You can pay 1000 life points to destroy all other cards on the field. During each of your end phases, send the top 4 cards of your deck to the graveyard. This card was sacky. It was just so sacky. Everyone who played against Light Swarms hated this card. They feared it. Oh, by the way, that effect of special summon it, there's no limit on it. If you had 2 Judgment Dragons in your hand, you could just drop the first, nuke the field, drop the second, attack for 6000 life points and likely game. What a sacky ass card. There would not be another main set release now until after the World Championship in August. For the time being, players had to make do with filler releases. Light of Destruction Special Edition came with Kuraz the Light Monarch, whilst Premium Pack 2 introduced Masuki for zombies and Valhalla Hall of the Fallen for fairies. Also releasing at this time was the European exclusive reprint set Retro Pack. Berlin would set the scene for the 2008 World Championship, as American Robert Ackerman would give the USA their best chance to date at getting the gold. Unfortunately for Ackerman, it just wasn't to be. Mutsuoka Kazuki of Japan would be taking first place on the day. The 2008 World Championship would be an excellent one for Gladiator Beast decks, but an absolutely terrible one for Dark Arm Dragon decks, as not a single dad build was able to make top 8. Kazuki's build is a good profile of what the Gladiator Beast was capable of, a carefully balanced mix between aggression and control. The Gladiator Beast monsters would battle and then tag out to use their effects and establish field control. With Gladiator Proving Ground acting as a reinforcement of the army for the deck, Gladiator Beasts would have no problem searching the monsters they needed for any situation. Fusion summons into Gasaurus and Heraclinos would establish card advantage and field control respectively. One of the cooler tech options in this build was the inclusion of Elemental Hero Prisma, who could send Gladiator Beasts in the graveyard to gain their name and fuse into Gasaurus or Heraclinos. DD Crow would become established as the hand trap of choice for the format, not only for its ability to banish revival targets, but also for how it could screw over Light Swarm and Dark decks by taking away their ability to summon Judgment Dragon and Dark Arm Dragon. The trap lineup was heavy with cards included specifically to out big boss monsters. Triple Kaiku in the side played much the same role as DD Crow, removing Light Swarms and Dark monsters from the graveyard. Finally, Triple Mind Control was useful not only for stealing Gladiator Beasts for fusion, but for also stealing your opponent's boss monsters and using their effects against them. This is a solid build and the kind of thing you would expect to win a World Championship. While Robert Ackerman's Gladiator Beast build failed to win Worlds, it was easily the more inventive of the 2 decks. One combo in particular caught my attention when researching these deck lists. The inclusion of Elemental Hero Prisma at 3, Phantom of Chaos, and Reaper on the Nightmare in the fusion deck. So here's how I think this combo worked. First, summon your Elemental Hero Prisma to send either Sangan or Spirit Reaper to the graveyard using their fusion monsters, and then copy either Sangan or Spirit Reaper's name, effect and stats using Phantom of Chaos. Once you had done that, not only could you use Phantom of Chaos the same way you'd use a Spirit Reaper, but you could also use the card as a target for Crush Card Virus. This was an inventive way to thin down your deck and make your Crush card more active. Very impressive work. Other than that, Ackerman's build was more focused on aggression, playing triple copies of almost every main Gladiator beast. Triple Cold Wave in the spell selection further pushed this aggression strategy. Ackerman's side would be built primarily to kill other decks off. Triple Light Imprisoning Mirror would deal with Light Swarms, Mask of Restrict would deal with any Monarchs that happen to see play, and Pole Position in theory would help protect Gasaris and Heraklinos from spell cards. In third place we would have Norihama Takeru playing Light Swarms. This build is about as pure as Light Swarms could get. There were no gimmicks here. The win condition was pretty straightforward. You set up your grave with Solar Recharge and Raiko, then you establish your board with Lumina, Lila, Garroth and Wolf. After that you just keep controlling the game until Judgment Dragon becomes live. Honest would make it so your monsters could battle over anything, and Necro Gardener would protect them from Gladiator beasts. This build probably didn't need 42 cards, but the double monster reincarnation did allow Takeru to retrieve his Judgment Dragon should he mill them to the grave. The side deck was more of the same, Cyber Dragons for going second, Heralds for getting your Judgment Dragons, Cold Waves for aggression, and back row removal. And that's it for the 2008 World Championship deck profiles. 2008 had been a pretty crazy year for Yu-Gi-Oh so far, and the game had already seen a lot of changes, but more were to come, as we were about to see the beginning of a new era for the game. The 2008 World Championship would officially mark the end of the GX era, and the beginning of something completely different. And that is the story of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG in its formative years. Thanks for watching everybody. If you'd like to know how 2008 ends, there's an additional 15 minutes of content on my 2008 retrospective. For my long-time watchers, I hope you don't mind this extensive omnibus that I've put together. When I started this series, the original plan was to go up to this point anyway, so what you're seeing is this project as I originally intended it to be. Don't worry, I'm not abandoning the yearly format, there'll be more to come in the future. Until then, catch you next time.